Welcome, weary traveller, to a journey through the ancient chronicles of Hyrule's most magnificent guardians. Tonight, we shall explore the complete saga of the divine beasts, those colossal sentinels that have watched over the kingdom through cycles of light and shadow spanning millennia. These are more than mere machines, they are symbols of hope incarnate, monuments to the eternal dance between creation and destruction. So settle yourself comfortably, let your breathing slow, and allow your mind to drift as we walk together through the timeless legends of these mechanical titans. Close your eyes when you're ready, and let us begin this contemplative pilgrimage through the ages. In the distant echoes of time, long before the kingdom of Hyrule took the shape that history would remember, there existed a civilization whose mastery of both divine wisdom and mechanical precision would become the stuff of legends whispered across 10,000 years. This was the age of the ancient Sheikah, when the Shadow Folk walked openly under the sun's blessing, and their devotion to the goddess Hylia was matched only by their unprecedented understanding of the sacred sciences that governed all creation. These were not merely clever craftsmen or gifted inventors, but a people who had unlocked something far more profound, the ability to harmonize the spiritual and the mechanical, to create works that served as bridges between the realm of the divine and the world of mortal endeavor. Their knowledge ran deeper than the manipulation of metal and crystal. They understood the very essence of life itself, the patterns of energy that flowed through all living things, and the ways in which these patterns could be preserved, enhanced, and given new form through their miraculous technologies. The ancient Sheikah had achieved what would seem impossible to later generations. They had learned to embed souls into machines, to create constructs that possessed not merely intelligence, but something approaching wisdom, vessels that could house consciousness itself and give it eternal form. This was not necromancy or dark magic, but something far more sublime, a perfect synthesis of divine blessing and mortal ingenuity that allowed them to transcend the normal limitations of flesh and time. Their greatest achievement in this sacred art was the creation of the original divine beasts, 4 colossal war machines that represented the pinnacle of everything their civilization had learned about the marriage of spirit and mechanism. These first divine beasts were not merely larger versions of their other creations, but something altogether more magnificent mechanical gods given form, each one a perfect fusion of devastating capability and protective purpose. Unlike the divine beasts that would be built 10 millennia later, these original titans bore no specific resemblance to the creatures that the various races of Hyrule held sacred. They were purely expressions of Sheikah aesthetic sensibilities and engineering philosophy, their forms flowing and organic, despite being constructed entirely of metal and crystal. Each divine beast was unique in its configuration, yet all 4 shared certain fundamental characteristics that marked them as products of the same transcendent understanding. Their hulls were crafted from materials that seemed to exist at the intersection of the physical and the spiritual, metals that held light within their very structure, and crystals that pulsed with the rhythm of living hearts. The symbols etched into their surfaces were not mere decoration but functional elements of their design, circuits of divine energy that allowed them to channel power directly from the sacred realm itself. The weapon systems of these original divine beasts operated on principles that later civilizations would struggle to understand, much less replicate. They did not simply fire beams of concentrated energy or launch physical projectiles, but rather projected force that seemed to operate on multiple planes simultaneously. Their attacks could shatter the strongest fortifications while leaving delicate flowers untouched, destroy armies of monsters while healing the very ground they fought upon. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of these ancient war machines was their pilots, 4 individuals whose names have been lost to the turning of ages, but whose legacy would echo through all the centuries that followed. These were not merely skilled warriors chosen for their combat prowess, but something far more rare and precious souls who had achieved perfect harmony between their mortal nature and the divine essence that flowed through the machinery they commanded. The pilot of the first divine beast was said to be a master of the flowing arts, someone who understood water not merely as a physical substance, but as a metaphor for the adaptability and persistence that life requires to flourish in any environment. Under their guidance, their divine beast could command rivers and seas with the same precision that a musician commands melody, redirecting the very currents of existence to serve the cause of protection and healing. The second pilot had achieved mastery over the forces of earth and flame, understanding that true strength comes not from rigid immobility but from the ability to endure and adapt while maintaining one's essential nature. Their divine beast moved through molten rock as easily as a fish swims through water, its presence bringing not destruction but renewal, clearing away what was old and worn to make space for new growth. The third pilot was one who had learned to dance with the winds themselves, understanding that freedom and mobility are not luxuries but necessities for any who would protect the innocent from forces beyond their control. Their divine beast soared through the heavens with grace that made earthbound observers weep with joy, its shadow bringing comfort rather than fear to those who looked up from below. The fourth and final pilot had achieved something perhaps even more remarkable than their companions: perfect mastery over the forces of judgment itself, the ability to call down divine wrath with precision so perfect that it could strike at the heart of evil while leaving everything pure and innocent completely untouched. Their divine beast commanded lightning not as a weapon of indiscriminate destruction but as a surgical instrument of divine justice. Together, these four pilots and their mechanical partners formed a force unlike anything the world had ever seen or would ever see again. They were not merely weapons of war, but guardians of the natural order, protectors whose very existence served to maintain the delicate balance that allowed life to flourish in all its myriad forms. When Calamity Ganon first emerged from whatever dark realm had spawned it, drawn by the prosperity and beauty of the ancient kingdom like a moth to flame, it found not a defenseless civilization ripe for conquest, but a realm protected by guardians whose power rivaled that of the gods themselves. The battle that followed was not the swift destruction that the Calamity had anticipated, but a conflict that would test every aspect of its malevolent nature against defenders who understood both the price of failure and the true meaning of victory. The ancient Sheikah had prepared for this confrontation with the thoroughness that characterized all their great works. They understood that Calamity Ganon was not merely another monster to be defeated through application of superior force, but something far more fundamental and dangerous, a force of entropy given consciousness, destruction incarnate, the physical manifestation of everything that sought to tear down what others had built. The strategy they devised was elegant in its simplicity and profound in its implications. Rather than attempt to destroy the Calamity through direct confrontation, they would contain it, surround it with forces so perfectly balanced and coordinated that it would have no choice but to face the goddess's chosen champions on terms that favored the forces of light. The four original divine beasts took positions at strategic points around the ancient battlefield, their massive weapons creating an interlocking pattern of control that gradually compressed the space available to the Calamity and its minions. Every attempt to break free of this mechanical cage was met with precise application of overwhelming force, while every effort to summon reinforcements was thwarted by the divine beast's perfect coordination. Slowly but inexorably, the great evil found itself driven toward the center of the trap, where the princess and hero of that ancient age waited with the master sword and the sacred power that had been passed down through the royal bloodline since the beginning of time itself. The final confrontation, when it came, was swift and decisive, not because the calamity was weak, but because it had been maneuvered into a position where its strengths meant nothing and its weaknesses were perfectly exposed. The victory that followed was complete and absolute. Calamity Ganon was not merely defeated but sealed away so thoroughly that its very existence began to fade from memory, becoming first history, then legend, then myth, until finally it was nothing more than a story told to frighten children into good behavior. The ancient Shaker had achieved something unprecedented. They had not merely won a battle, but had fundamentally altered the balance of power between light and darkness in favor of the light. Yet this triumph, complete as it was, carried within it the seeds of its own undoing. The display of power that the ancient Sheikah had demonstrated in defeating Calamity Ganon was so overwhelming, so far beyond anything that conventional military forces could hope to match, that it fundamentally altered how the kingdom's leaders understood the nature of power itself. The king who ruled in the aftermath of the great victory found himself faced with a troubling realization. The very people who had saved his kingdom possessed abilities that made his own authority essentially meaningless. If the Sheikah chose to rebel, if they decided that their technological superiority gave them the right to rule, there was absolutely nothing he could do to stop them. This fear began as a whisper in the back of his mind, but gradually grew into a roar that drowned out all other considerations. The saviors of Hyrule, the people who had sacrificed everything to protect the kingdom they served so faithfully, suddenly seemed less like heroes and more like threats that needed to be managed, controlled, or, if necessary, eliminated. The decision, when it finally came, was presented as a matter of public safety and royal wisdom, but those who understood the true motivations behind it recognized it for what it really was, an act of betrayal so profound and unconscionable that it would poison the relationship between the crown and the shadow folk for generations to come. The divine beasts, those magnificent guardians that had saved the kingdom from annihilation, were declared too dangerous to remain in operation. Their incredible power, the king proclaimed, posed an unacceptable risk to the peace and stability that their own victory had made possible. They would be dismantled, buried, hidden away where they could never again threaten the natural order of royal authority. But the betrayal went far deeper than the mere burial of machines. The ancient Sheikah themselves, the architects of victory, and the servants of the goddess were banished from the kingdom they had served so faithfully. The very people who had given everything to protect Hyrule were driven from their homes and laboratories, scattered to the far corners of the realm like leaves before a hurricane. Some of the shadow folk accepted this exile with the same stoic dignity they had shown in everything else, trusting in the wisdom of the goddess, even when that wisdom seemed impossible for mortal minds to comprehend. These faithful Sheikah gathered what possessions they could carry and departed without violence or protest, eventually settling in remote villages where they could continue their devotion to Hylia in peace and obscurity. But not all of the ancient Sheikah could find such acceptance in their hearts. The betrayal cut too deep, the injustice too profound for some to simply endure in silence. These shadow folk had given everything for the kingdom, their knowledge, their skills, their very lives, only to be rewarded with fear and suspicion. The gratitude they had expected had curdled into resentment. The trust they had offered freely had been repaid with exile and disgrace. This profound injustice tore the Sheikah people in two, creating a schism that would have consequences far beyond anything the king could have imagined. While most of the shadow folk remained true to their faith in the goddess and accepted their exile with grace, others made a different choice entirely, abandoning not only the kingdom that had cast them out, but also the goddess they felt had allowed such an injustice to occur. These bitter and betrayed Sheikah would eventually become the ancestors of the Yiga clan, though their transformation from servants of light to agents of darkness would take many generations to complete. The seeds of their eventual rebellion were planted in this moment of betrayal, nurtured by anger and resentment that would be passed down through bloodlines like a genetic curse. The original divine beasts, meanwhile, were subjected to the same systematic erasure that befell all traces of ancient Sheikah achievement. They were disassembled with painstaking care, their components separated and buried in locations so remote and well hidden that even the maps marking their resting places were subsequently destroyed. The knowledge of how they had been built, how they functioned, and what principles had guided their creation was declared forbidden, punishable by exile, or worse, for any who dared to preserve it. Within a single generation, the greatest triumph in the kingdom's history had been transformed into its greatest shame. The divine beasts that had saved Hyrule from destruction were forgotten so completely that when ancient texts made reference to them in later centuries, scholars dismissed such mentions as obvious exaggerations or outright fabrications. Yet the legacy of these first divine beasts could not be completely erased, for they had established principles and precedents that would endure long after their physical forms had been reduced to scattered components buried beneath tons of earth and stone. The idea that mechanical constructs could serve as guardians of the realm, that technology and spirituality could work in perfect harmony, that the various races of Hyrule could unite their greatest strengths in service of a common cause. These concepts had been planted so deeply in the kingdom's consciousness that they would eventually sprout again when the time was right. The four pilots of the original divine beasts, though their names were lost to history, became the template for all who would follow in their footsteps. The next generation of champions, chosen 10,000 years later to face the calamity's inevitable return, would unconsciously echo the specializations and qualities that had made their ancient predecessors so effective in their roles as guardians of the realm. And so the first divine beasts passed into legend, their physical forms destroyed but their spiritual essence preserved in the collective memory of a kingdom that had learned, too late, to appreciate what it had lost. They had been the first, but they would not be the last. For the cycle of destruction and renewal that governed all existence in Hyrule would eventually demand their return in new forms, piloted by new heroes, facing the same ancient evil that their predecessors had defeated so long ago. In the quiet moments between sleeping and waking, when the mind drifts between memory and dream, some say that the spirits of those first divine beasts can still be sensed, their presence a gentle reminder that even the greatest victories can be forgotten by history, but the principles they embody, protection, unity, sacrifice, and hope, endure forever in the hearts of those who understand their true meaning. In the crystal clear waters that have flowed through the domain of the Zora since time immemorial, where every ripple carries with it the memory of countless generations, and every current sings with the voices of ancestors long passed into legend, there stands a monument to both engineering brilliance and cultural devotion that embodies the very essence of what it means to be one with the flowing heart of existence itself. This is Varuta, the great mechanical elephant whose form was chosen not merely for its imposing size or practical capabilities, but as a profound tribute to Princess Ruta, that legendary Zora whose wisdom and compassion had become the foundation stones upon which her people's greatest aspirations were built. To understand the true significance of Varuta, one must first comprehend the deep spiritual connection that exists between the Zora people and the element that sustains all life, water, in all its myriad forms. For the aquatic race, water is not merely the medium through which they move or the substance that fills their lungs, but something far more fundamental and sacred. It is the physical manifestation of the eternal flow of existence itself, the visible representation of how all things are connected in an endless cycle of giving and receiving, growing and changing, living and dying, and being reborn again. The elephant, chosen as the divine beast's form, holds special meaning in Zora culture that extends far beyond its obvious association with water manipulation through its trunk-like appendage. In their most ancient myths and legends, the elephant represents memory itself, the ability to hold on to what is precious from the past while moving forward with gentle strength into an uncertain future. It symbolizes the wisdom that comes from understanding that true power lies not in overwhelming force, but in the patient, persistent application of effort guided by compassion and understanding. Princess Ruta, for whom the divine beast was named, had embodied all of these qualities during her legendary reign over the Zora people in an age so distant that even their long-lived race could barely remember the details of her actual deeds. What they remembered, what they passed down through generations in songs that were sung at every important ceremony, was the essence of what she had represented. A ruler who governed not through commands or declarations, but through the gentle influence of perfect example. The stories told of Princess Ruta spoke of a leader who could end droughts with her tears of joy and heal the deepest wounds with water touched by her compassionate spirit. She had been, according to these tales, someone who understood that true leadership meant serving as a conduit through which the needs of her people could be met, much as a river serves as the channel through which life-giving water reaches every part of the landscape it touches. When the ancient Sheikah began their great work of designing divine beasts that would represent and protect each of Hyrule's major races, the choice to honor Princess Ruta through the elephant form war machine was not made lightly or hastily. Teams of Sheikah architects and engineers spent months living among the Zora, studying their culture, observing their rituals, and learning to understand the deep philosophical principles that govern their approach to existence itself. What they discovered was a people whose entire worldview was built around concepts of flow, adaptation, and gentle persistence. The Zora understood better than any other race that true strength comes not from rigidity or the ability to impose one's will through force, but from the capacity to work with natural forces rather than against them, to find the path of least resistance while never losing sight of one's ultimate destination. This understanding informed every aspect of Varuta's design, from the flowing curves of its outer hull that seemed to ripple like water, even when standing perfectly still, to the sophisticated hydraulic systems that allowed it to move with surprising grace despite its enormous size. The divine beast was not merely built to look like an elephant, it was designed to embody the elephant's essential nature, to move through the world with the same patient dignity and gentle power that characterized both the great land mammals and the aquatic people it was created to protect. The most remarkable aspect of Varuta's construction was its water manipulation system, a network of channels, pumps, and pressure chambers so sophisticated that it seemed to operate more through magic than mechanical principles. The great trunk that extended from the divine beast's front could draw water from any source, no matter how distant or seemingly inaccessible, pulling moisture from the very air itself if necessary, and concentrating it into streams of tremendous force and volume. But Varuta's relationship with water went far beyond its ability to weaponize the life-giving element. The divine beast could purify contaminated water sources, redirect rivers and streams to prevent flooding or drought, and even generate its own supply of the purest, most life-sustaining water from the ambient moisture that existed in any environment. In times of peace, it served not as a weapon, but as a guardian of the natural hydrological cycles that supported all life throughout its region. The interior chambers of Vah Ruta were marvels of both engineering and artistry, their walls covered with flowing patterns that seemed to shift and change like the play of sunlight on moving water. Every surface was designed to channel and guide the flow of both physical water and spiritual energy, creating an environment where the boundary between the mechanical and the organic became so blurred as to be effectively meaningless. Throughout the great machine's interior, streams of crystal clear water flowed along channels carved into the floor and walls, their gentle murmuring creating a constant background melody that was said to be soothing to both the divine beast's pilot and any visitors who might be fortunate enough to experience the wonder of its inner spaces. These streams served practical purposes as well as aesthetic ones, carrying away excess heat from the divine beast's power systems and providing a constant supply of fresh water for any emergency. The control chamber at Vah Ruta's heart was perhaps the most beautiful space ever created by the collaborative efforts of Sheikah technology and Zora artistic sensibility. The walls curved in perfect harmony with the principles of hydrodynamic flow, while the control systems themselves were integrated so seamlessly into the chamber's design that they seemed to have grown there naturally, rather than being installed by any mechanical process. From this sacred space, the divine beast's pilot could command not only the great machine's movement and weapon systems, but also its more subtle abilities, the power to influence weather patterns across vast distances, to sense the health of every river and stream within 100 miles, and to communicate with aquatic life forms through vibrations transmitted through the water itself. When Princess Mifa was chosen to serve as Vah Ruta's pilot, the selection represented the culmination of a lifetime spent in preparation for exactly this role, though she herself had never imagined that such a destiny awaited her. From her earliest childhood, it had been clear that she possessed gifts that set her apart, even among the naturally talented Zora people. Not merely her extraordinary skill with the traditional weapons of her race, but something far more rare and precious. Mifa's healing abilities were legendary throughout Hyrule, spoken of in whispered conversations that invariably began with expressions of wonder and ended with prayers of gratitude for the existence of such a gift in a world that so often seemed hostile to life and hope. Her touch could mend broken bones, heal wounds that would have killed any other patient, and even restore life to those who had already begun their journey toward the realm of the dead. But perhaps more remarkable than her healing powers was the spirit of compassion that guided their use. Mifa had never once refused to help anyone who came to her in need, regardless of their race, their social status, or the circumstances that had led to their injury. She understood instinctively that healing was not merely about repairing physical damage, but about restoring hope, renewing faith, and reminding people of the fundamental goodness that existed at the heart of all creation. Her selection as Vah Ruta's pilot was unanimous among those responsible for such decisions, but it was also bittersweet for those who loved her. Everyone understood that this honor carried with it tremendous risks, that the pilot of a divine beast would inevitably be called upon to face dangers that no amount of healing ability could completely protect against. Yet they also understood that no one else possessed the perfect combination of skill, wisdom, and spiritual strength that would be required to form the kind of bond with Vah Ruta that would make their partnership truly effective. The process by which Mipha learned to interface with her divine beast was unlike anything that had been attempted before in the long history of either Zora or Sheikah achievement. It required not merely the mastery of mechanical control systems, but the development of an almost telepathic connection with the great machine's spiritual essence, a form of communication that operated on levels far beyond the reach of normal consciousness. Mipha would spend hours in Vah Ruta's control chamber, not practicing specific maneuvers or combat techniques, but simply learning to feel the rhythm of the divine beast's artificial heart, to sense the flow of energy through its systems, to understand the subtle ways in which its mechanical nature interfaced with the natural world around it. Gradually, through patience and dedication that would have impressed even the most demanding Sheikah masters, she achieved something unprecedented, a true symbiosis between organic consciousness and mechanical intelligence. When Mipha and Vah Ruta moved together across the waters of Hyrule, they did so with a grace and harmony that made observers forget they were watching a war machine at all. The great mechanical elephant seemed to dance rather than walk, its movements flowing like water itself while its pilot guided it with gestures so subtle they were barely visible to watching eyes. The relationship between Mipha and Link during the months of preparation that preceded the Great Calamity was one of the most poignant and complex bonds in all the kingdom's history, a connection that transcended the boundaries between races and spoke to the universal capacity for love to flourish, even in the shadow of approaching doom. Mipha had known Link since childhood, when he had visited Zora's domain as a young knight in training, but the feelings that developed between them during their time as fellow champions carried a depth and intensity that neither had experienced before. For Mipha, these emotions represented something unprecedented in her long life, the discovery that healing others had prepared her for the even more profound experience of loving someone enough to consider sharing her entire existence with them. Following the ancient traditions of her people, she had begun crafting a set of armor specifically designed for Link, each piece shaped with meticulous care and imbued with protective magic that would shield him from harm even in the most dangerous circumstances. The creation of such armor was, according to Zora custom, part of a formal marriage proposal, a way of offering not merely protection in battle, but a promise of shared life and mutual devotion that would endure across all the challenges that the future might bring. Every stitch, every carefully shaped piece of metal and scale represented hours of work performed while contemplating the possibility of a happiness so complete that it seemed almost too wonderful to imagine. Yet Mipha's love remained unspoken, her intentions known only to herself and a few close family members who had observed the care with which she worked on her gift. The approaching crisis left no time for the courtship rituals that would normally precede such a significant step, while the weight of responsibility that rested upon both her and Link made personal happiness seem like a luxury that would have to wait until after their duties to the kingdom had been fulfilled. When Calamity Ganon finally emerged from its long slumber and the carefully laid plans for defending the kingdom began to unfold, Mipha piloted Vah Ruta toward her assigned position with a heart full of both hope and foreboding. She understood better than most what they were facing, having spent countless hours studying the ancient records of the first battle against the great evil, and she knew that victory was far from guaranteed, despite all their preparations. The corruption of Vah Ruta happened with a swiftness that caught even Mipha's heightened senses completely off guard. One moment she was preparing to coordinate with her fellow champions in the greatest battle of their generation, and the next she found herself facing a horror that defied every expectation of what combat against Calamity Ganon might entail. The malice that invaded her divine beast was not merely an external enemy to be fought and defeated, but something that seemed to corrupt the very essence of everything it touched. Waterblight Ganon, the entity that had been specifically designed to counter Mipha's abilities and claim Vah Ruta for the forces of darkness, represented the ultimate perversion of everything the Zora princess held sacred. Where Mipha healed, it inflicted wounds that resisted all treatment. Where she brought life and hope, it spread death and despair. Where her movements flowed like water, it struck with the violence of a tsunami that destroyed everything in its path. The battle that followed was not merely a physical contest, but a spiritual struggle between two fundamentally opposed visions of what existence should be. Mipha fought not just for her own life, or even for the success of their mission, but for the very principle that compassion and healing could triumph over hatred and destruction. Every parry of her trident, every attempt to use her healing powers to counter the corruption spreading through her divine beast, was an affirmation of her faith in the ultimate goodness of creation itself. Yet even faith and skill and courage beyond measure were not enough to overcome an enemy that had been designed with perfect knowledge of her strengths and weaknesses. Waterblight Ganon had studied her fighting style, analyzed her healing techniques, and prepared countermeasures that turned her greatest gifts into vulnerabilities. The very compassion that made her such an effective healer became a weakness when facing a foe that felt no pain and could not be reasoned with or redeemed. Mipha's final moments in life were spent not in despair but in a kind of transcendent peace, as she realized that even in death she might serve the cause of light by ensuring that her divine beast could not be used to harm the innocent people she had sworn to protect. Her consciousness merged with Vah Ruta's systems in a way that had never been achieved before, her spirit becoming part of the great machine's essence and creating a form of resistance that even Waterblight Ganon could not completely overcome. For 100 years, while Link slept in the Shrine of Resurrection and Princess Zelda held Calamity Ganon at bay through the strength of her own will, Mipha's spirit endured within the corrupted divine beast, maintaining a constant struggle against the malice that had claimed her mechanical partner. This was a form of existence that no living being should have been forced to endure conscious awareness, trapped within a prison of hatred and corruption, watching helplessly as everything she had tried to protect was threatened by the very machine she had died trying to save. The corruption of Vah Ruta created problems for the Zora people that went far beyond the immediate military threat posed by a hostile divine beast. The great machine's water manipulation abilities, now guided by malevolent intelligence rather than compassionate wisdom, began to disrupt the natural hydrological cycles that had sustained life in the region for millennia. Rivers changed course without warning, flooding areas that had been dry land for generations, while leaving traditional water sources completely desiccated. The endless rain that Vah Ruta generated in its corrupted state was not the gentle, life-giving precipitation that the region needed, but a torrential deluge that threatened to wash away entire communities and drown the very people the divine beast had been built to protect. The water itself seemed somehow tainted, carrying with it a spiritual pollution that made plants wither and animals flee to distant regions where the air did not carry the scent of ancient malice. King Dorephan, already aged beyond his prime when the great calamity struck, found himself facing challenges that would have tested the wisdom of leaders half his age and twice as experienced in military matters. His daughter was gone, trapped within the mechanical monster that now threatened his entire domain, while his younger son Sidon was still too young to take on the responsibilities that would normally fall to the heir of a royal house. The Zora people, despite their natural longevity and their cultural tendency toward patient endurance, began to show signs of the strain that living under constant threat inevitably produces. Communities that had thrived for centuries were abandoned, as their water sources became unreliable or dangerous. Traditional fishing grounds were transformed into raging torrents that no Zora, regardless of their swimming ability, could safely navigate. Yet even in these darkest circumstances, the essential character of the Zora people shone through their response to seemingly impossible challenges. Rather than falling into despair or turning against each other in their frustration, they adapted with the same fluid grace that had always characterized their approach to existence. New communities formed in areas that had never been settled before, while innovative techniques for water management and purification were developed through the collaborative efforts of their most skilled engineers and their most wise elders. Prince Sidon, thrust into a position of leadership responsibilities far earlier than anyone had anticipated, proved himself worthy of his sister's legacy through his unwavering optimism and his natural ability to inspire hope even in the most discouraging circumstances. Where a lesser leader might have become bitter or cynical in the face of such overwhelming challenges, Sidon chose to view every setback as an opportunity to demonstrate the resilience and creativity that were the Zora people's greatest strengths. When Link finally awakened from his century of healing sleep and began his quest to cleanse the corrupted divine beasts, the news of his return spread through Zora's domain like ripples across still water. Here was someone who had known Princess Mipha personally, who had witnessed her skill and compassion firsthand, and who now possessed the power to free her spirit from its long imprisonment within the corrupted machine that bore her ancestral name. The preparation for the assault on Vah Ruta required not merely military planning, but a deep understanding of both the divine beast's capabilities and the emotional significance of what they were attempting to achieve. This was not simply a matter of destroying an enemy war machine, but of liberating a beloved friend and restoring balance to natural systems that had been disrupted for an entire century. Prince Sidon's partnership with Link in planning and executing the attack demonstrated the same kind of interracial cooperation that had characterized the original Champions Fellowship. The young Zora prince brought to the endeavor his intimate knowledge of local water conditions and his natural swimming abilities, while Link contributed the combat skills and magical capabilities that would be necessary to penetrate Vah Ruta's defenses and reach the control chamber where the real battle would be fought. The actual assault on the divine beast became a testament to the power of determination guided by love and loyalty. Every shock arrow that struck Vah Ruta's vulnerable points, every moment of perfect coordination between Link and Sidon as they navigated the treacherous waters around the great machine, represented not just tactical skill, but emotional investment in the outcome that went far beyond professional duty. When Link finally set foot on Vah Ruta's deck and began his journey through the corrupted interior spaces, he found himself walking through chambers that had once been filled with the gentle sound of flowing water and the peaceful radiance of Princess Mipha's healing presence. Now those same spaces pulsed with malevolent energy, their walls stained with veins of purple corruption that seemed to throb with their own horrible life. The puzzles that Link encountered within the divine beast were not merely mechanical challenges, but tests of his understanding of the principles that had guided Vah Ruta's original design. To progress through the corrupted chambers, he had to think like a Zora, to understand water, not merely as a physical substance, but as a metaphor for the flow of life itself, the endless cycle of giving and receiving that connected all living things in an invisible web of mutual dependence. Each terminal that Link activated, each system that he restored to proper function, brought him closer, not only to the central control chamber, but to a deeper appreciation of the incredible feat of engineering and artistry that Vah Ruta represented. Even corrupted and turned against its original purpose, the divine beast remained a masterpiece of harmonious design, its every component serving multiple functions, while contributing to the elegant unity of the whole. The confrontation with Waterblight Ganon, when it finally came, was perhaps the most emotionally charged of all Link's battles against the corrupted entities that had claimed the divine beasts. This was not merely another enemy to be defeated, but the destroyer of someone he had cared about deeply, the corrupter of a machine that had been built with love and dedication by people who deserved better than to see their greatest achievement turned into an instrument of oppression. The battle itself tested every aspect of Link's abilities, from his skill with conventional weapons to his mastery of the Sheikah Slate's various functions. Waterblight Ganon's attacks seemed designed specifically to exploit the weaknesses that Princess Mipha had displayed in their first encounter, forcing Link to fight in ways that honored her memory, while avoiding the tactical errors that had led to her defeat. When Waterblight Ganon finally fell, and its corrupted essence dispersed into nothingness, the change in Vah Ruta's interior was immediate and profound. The purple veins of malice that had stained every surface faded away like bad dreams banished by morning light, while the gentle sound of flowing water returned to chambers that had known only the harsh mechanical noise of corrupted systems for far too long. Princess Mipha's spirit, freed at last from its century of torment, appeared before Link, with all the grace and compassion that had made her legendary in life. Her greeting carried within it not only joy at their reunion, but profound gratitude for the suffering he had endured to make this moment possible. She had watched over him throughout his trials, she revealed, her consciousness somehow maintaining awareness of events in the wider world, even while trapped within the corrupted divine beast. The gift that Mipha bestowed upon Link, her healing power, manifested as a protective blessing that could restore him to full health, even after the most grievous injuries represented more than just a practical advantage for the battles that lay ahead. It was a tangible expression of the love that she had never had the opportunity to declare in life, a promise that even death could not sever the bonds forged between souls who had found something precious in each other. With Vah Ruta cleansed and restored to its proper function, the great divine beast took its position overlooking Hyrule Castle, its massive water cannon aimed at the source of the corruption that had claimed it for so long. But more than just a weapon pointed at an enemy stronghold, the great mechanical elephant had become once again what it had always been meant to be: a guardian and protector, a symbol of the enduring power of compassion and healing to triumph over hatred and destruction. The restoration of natural water cycles throughout the region began almost immediately, as Vah Ruta's purified systems worked to undo a century's worth of damage to rivers, streams, and underground aquifers. The endless rain that had plagued the area for so long gave way to more natural precipitation patterns, while contaminated water sources were gradually cleansed through processes that seemed to operate as much through spiritual purification as through any mechanical filtration. For the Zora people, the liberation of Vah Ruta represented not merely the removal of a threat, but the return of hope itself. Princess Mipha's sacrifice had not been in vain. Her spirit had found peace at last, and the divine beast that bore her ancestral name was once again serving its intended purpose of protecting the innocent and preserving the delicate balance of the natural world. Among the volcanic peaks that pierce the sky like ancient spears thrust upward by the very bones of the earth itself, where molten rock flows like rivers of liquid fire, and the air shimmers with heat that would reduce lesser beings to ash within moments of exposure, there stands a monument to both the indomitable spirit of the Goron people and the incredible ingenuity of the ancient Sheikah, who learned to harmonize their technology with the most extreme forces of nature. This is Vah Rudania, the great mechanical salamander whose form was chosen not merely for its association with creatures that thrive in fiery environments, but as a profound tribute to Chief Rudania, that legendary Goron whose strength and wisdom had become the bedrock upon which his people's greatest traditions were built. To truly comprehend the significance of Vah Rudania, one must first understand the unique relationship that exists between the Goron people and the elemental forces that would destroy any other race, but which they have learned to embrace as the very source of their strength and vitality. For these gentle giants, fire and molten rock are not obstacles to be overcome or dangers to be avoided, but essential elements of existence itself. The physical manifestations of the passion and determination that burn within every Goron heart. The salamander, chosen as the divine beast's form, holds deep spiritual meaning in Goron culture that extends far beyond its obvious ability to thrive in environments of intense heat and volcanic activity. In their most ancient legends and creation myths, the salamander represents the principle of transformation through trial, the understanding that true strength is forged in the crucible of hardship, that the greatest treasures are found in the most challenging places, and that what appears destructive on the surface may actually be the force that shapes and refines the spirit. Chief Rudania, for whom the divine beast was named, had embodied these principles during his legendary leadership of the Goron people in an age so distant that even their cultural memory, passed down through countless generations of oral tradition, could preserve only the essence of his character rather than the specific details of his deeds. What they remembered, what they celebrated in the rhythmic chants that accompanied their work in the mines and forges, was the spirit of what he had represented. A leader who understood that true authority comes not from commanding others, but from being willing to face any danger personally before asking others to share in the risk. The stories told of Chief Rudania spoke of a leader who could dive into the deepest lava flows to rescue trapped miners, who could forge weapons and tools of such incredible quality that they seemed to possess their own inner fire, and who could inspire even the most discouraged Goron to find renewed strength and purpose through the sheer force of his unwavering optimism and determination. He had been, according to these tales, someone who understood that leadership meant serving as the foundation stone upon which others could build their own achievements. When the ancient Sheikah began their monumental task of designing divine beasts that would represent and protect each of Hyrule's major races, the decision to honor Chief Rudania through the salamander form war machine represented months of careful study and contemplation. Teams of Sheikah engineers and craftsmen spent entire seasons living among the Goron people, working alongside them in the sweltering heat of their forges, descending with them into the dangerous depths of their minds, and gradually coming to understand the profound philosophical principles that governed their approach to existence and community. What they discovered was a people whose entire worldview was built around concepts of endurance, transformation, and the understanding that the most valuable things in life are those that must be earned through effort and dedication. The Gorons had learned, through countless generations of living in one of the world's most challenging environments, that true security comes not from avoiding hardship, but from developing the strength and skills necessary to thrive, despite any obstacle that might arise. This understanding informed every aspect of Vah Rudania's design, from the heat-resistant materials that allowed it to operate in temperatures that would melt conventional metals, to the sophisticated thermal regulation systems that could channel and redirect volcanic energy with the same precision that other machines might manipulate water or air. The divine beast was not merely built to look like a salamander, it was designed to embody the salamander's essential nature, to move through environments of extreme heat with the same natural grace that characterized both the legendary amphibians and the rock-eating people it was created to protect. The most remarkable aspect of Vah Rudania's construction was its ability to not just survive but actually draw strength from the volcanic environment of Death Mountain. The Great Machine's power systems were designed to tap directly into the geothermal energy that flowed through the mountain's core, using the same forces that created eruptions and lava flows to fuel weapons and movement systems of incredible sophistication and power. But Vah Rudania's relationship with volcanic forces went far beyond its ability to harness them for destructive purposes. The divine beast could regulate the mountain's volcanic activity, preventing dangerous eruptions, while ensuring that the natural processes that created the precious ores and gems upon which Goron society depended continued to function properly. In times of peace, it served not as a weapon, but as a guardian of the delicate balance that allowed both the mountain ecosystem and the Goron communities to flourish in harmony. The interior chambers of Vah Rudania were marvels of both engineering brilliance and artistic achievement, their walls crafted from materials that seemed to glow with their own inner fire while remaining cool enough to touch despite the incredible temperatures that surrounded them. Every surface was designed to channel and direct the flow of both thermal energy and spiritual power, creating an environment where the boundary between the mechanical and the geological became so blurred as to be effectively meaningless. Throughout the Great Machine's interior, streams of molten rock flowed along channels carved into the floor and walls, their gentle bubbling and occasional flares of intense light creating an environment that felt more like a natural cave system than the inside of any artificial construction. These lava flows served practical purposes, as well as aesthetic ones, carrying away excess heat from the divine beast's most sensitive systems, while providing a constant source of thermal energy for any emergency needs. The control chamber at Vah Rudania's heart was perhaps the most impressive space ever created through the collaboration of Sheikah technology and Goron craftsmanship. The walls curved in perfect harmony with the natural flow patterns of volcanic activity, while the control systems themselves were integrated so seamlessly into the chamber's design that they seemed to have been formed by the same geological processes that had created the mountain itself. From this sacred space, the divine beast's pilot could command not only the great machine's movement and weapons systems, but also its more subtle abilities, the power to influence volcanic activity across vast distances, to sense the location and quality of mineral deposits deep within the earth, and to communicate with the mountain itself through vibrations transmitted through solid rock. When Daruk was chosen to serve as Vah Rudania's pilot, the selection represented the natural conclusion of a lifetime spent embodying everything that the Goron people most valued and admired in their leaders. From his earliest youth, it had been clear that he possessed not only the physical strength that was common among his people, but something far more rare and precious. The kind of generous spirit and natural charisma that made others feel stronger and more capable, simply by being in his presence. Daruk's legendary strength was spoken of throughout Hyrule in terms that bordered on the mythical, stories of feats so incredible that visitors from other regions sometimes assumed they were hearing exaggerated folklore rather than factual accounts. He could lift boulders the size of houses with his bare hands, could forge weapons, while holding red-hot metal without any protection for his skin, and could dive into lava flows that would have vaporized any other living creature within seconds of contact. But perhaps more remarkable than his physical abilities was the character that guided their use. Daruk had never once used his incredible strength for any purpose other than helping others, protecting the innocent, or contributing to the welfare of his community. He understood instinctively that true power carried with it the obligation to serve those who were less fortunate, and he had never hesitated to put himself at risk when doing so might benefit someone else. His selection as Vah Rudania's pilot was not merely unanimous among those responsible for such decisions, but was actually demanded by popular acclaim from the Goron people themselves, who could not imagine anyone else being worthy of such an honor. Yet the choice also carried with it a weight of responsibility that even someone of Daruk's legendary optimism found somewhat daunting, for he understood better than most what they were preparing to face. The process by which Daruk learned to interface with his divine beast was unlike anything that had been attempted before in the long history of either Goron or Sheikah achievement. It required not merely the mastery of sophisticated control systems, but the development of an almost mystical connection with the geological forces that powered both the great machine and the mountain environment that surrounded it. Daruk would spend entire days within Var Rudania's control chamber, not practicing specific combat maneuvers or technical procedures, but simply learning to feel the rhythm of the mountain's heartbeat, to sense the flow of molten rock through channels far below the surface, to understand the subtle ways in which the divine beast's mechanical systems interfaced with the natural volcanic processes that sustained all life in the region. Gradually, through patience and dedication that impressed even the most demanding Sheikah engineers, he achieved something that bordered on the miraculous. A true synthesis between his own consciousness and the geological intelligence that seemed to exist within the mountain itself. When Daruk and Var Rudania moved together across the volcanic slopes, they did so with a harmony that made it impossible to tell whether Goron's natural abilities ended and the divine beast's mechanical capabilities began. The relationship between Daruk and Link during the months of preparation that preceded the Great Calamity was one of the most heartwarming and genuine friendships in all the kingdom's history, a bond that transcended not only the differences between their races, but also the significant gap in their ages and life experiences. Daruk had recognized in the young Hylian knight something that others might have missed, not merely exceptional skill with weapons or tactical brilliance, but the kind of courage that comes from a heart completely dedicated to protecting others. For Daruk, who had spent his entire life surrounded by people who looked to him for strength and guidance, the friendship with Link represented something precious and rare, the opportunity to serve as mentor and big brother to someone whose dedication to noble ideals matched his own. The Goron champion took genuine delight in Link's achievements and worried about his welfare with the same protective instincts he showed toward his own people. The casual way in which Daruk addressed Link as little guy or brother reflected not any condescension, but rather the natural affection of someone who had found a kindred spirit in the most unexpected circumstances. Despite the formality that surrounded their roles as champions, Daruk never allowed protocol to interfere with the warmth and spontaneity that characterized their personal interactions. When Calamity Ganon finally emerged from its long imprisonment and the carefully coordinated defense of the kingdom began to unfold according to plan, Daruk piloted Var Rudania toward his assigned position with a heart full of confidence and determination. He had complete faith in their preparation, absolute trust in his fellow champions, and unwavering belief that their combined efforts would be sufficient to protect the kingdom he loved from the ancient evil that threatened to destroy it. The corruption of Var Rudania happened with a swiftness and completeness that caught even Daruk's battle-honed instincts completely unprepared. One moment he was coordinating with his fellow champions through the communication systems that linked all four divine beasts, and the next he found himself facing a horror that defied every assumption about what their battle against Calamity Ganon would involve. The malice that invaded his divine beast was not simply an external enemy to be fought with conventional weapons and tactics, but something that seemed to corrupt the very essence of everything it encountered. The geological forces that Daruk had learned to work with so harmoniously suddenly turned against him, while the mechanical systems that had responded to his will like extensions of his own body began operating according to alien purposes that filled him with revulsion and dread. Fireblight Ganon, the entity that had been specifically created to counter Daruk's abilities and claim Var Rudania for the forces of darkness, represented the ultimate perversion of everything the Goron champion held sacred. Where Daruk protected, it destroyed. Where he brought strength and encouragement, it spread weakness and despair. Where his presence made others feel safer and more confident, its very existence inspired terror and hopelessness. The battle that followed was not merely a physical contest, but a spiritual struggle between two fundamentally opposed philosophies of existence. Daruk fought not just for his own survival or even for the success of their mission against the calamity, but for the principle that strength should be used to build up rather than tear down. That power carried with it the obligation to protect those who could not protect themselves. His protective instincts, which had always been his greatest strength, became a vulnerability when facing an enemy that had studied his fighting style and prepared specific countermeasures designed to exploit his natural desire to shield others from harm. Fireblight Ganon's attacks seemed calculated to force Daruk into defensive positions where his massive size and straightforward fighting style became disadvantages rather than assets. Every attempt to use his signature protective barrier, that miraculous ability to create shields of pure energy that could absorb tremendous amounts of damage, was countered by weapons that seemed designed specifically to overwhelm and penetrate such defenses. The very geology of Death Mountain, which had always been Daruk's ally and the source of his strength, was turned against him by an entity that could manipulate volcanic forces with malevolent intelligence. Daruk's final moments in life were spent not in despair or rage, but in a kind of determined resignation, as he realized that even in death he might serve the cause of light by ensuring that his beloved mountain and his people would be protected from the worst effects of Vah Rudania's corruption. His consciousness merged with the divine beast systems in ways that had never been achieved before, his spirit becoming part of the great machine's essence and creating a form of resistance that even Fireblight Ganon could not completely overcome. For 100 years, while Link slept in healing stasis and Princess Zelda held Calamity Ganon at bay through the power of her divine heritage, Daruk's spirit endured within the corrupted divine beast, maintaining a constant struggle against the malice that had claimed his mechanical partner. This was a form of existence that would have broken most souls, conscious awareness trapped within a prison of hatred and corruption, forced to watch helplessly as everything he had tried to protect was threatened by the very machine he had died attempting to save. The corruption of Vah Rudania created catastrophic problems for the Goron people that went far beyond the immediate military threat posed by a hostile divine beast operating within their traditional homeland. The great machine's thermal manipulation abilities, now guided by malevolent intelligence rather than protective wisdom, began to disrupt the natural volcanic cycles that had sustained both the mountain ecosystem and Goron civilization for countless generations. The salamander's movements around Death Mountain's summit created unpredictable eruptions and lava flows that made traditional mining operations impossible to conduct safely. Forges that had operated continuously for centuries were forced to shut down when the mountain's thermal patterns became too chaotic to predict or control. The very passages and chambers that generations of Gorons had carved into the mountain's structure became death traps as unstable volcanic activity threatened to collapse tunnels and fill living spaces with poisonous gases. The Goron people, despite their natural resistance to heat and their cultural tradition of facing hardship with good humor and determination, found themselves tested in ways that challenged even their legendary resilience. Communities that had thrived in the same locations for millennia were forced to evacuate when changing lava flows made their traditional homes uninhabitable. Mining families whose techniques and territories had been passed down through countless generations suddenly found themselves unable to practice the trades that defined their very identity. Yet, even in these darkest circumstances, the essential character of the Goron people shone through their response to seemingly impossible challenges. Rather than falling into despair or abandoning their mountain homeland entirely, they adapted with the same patient persistence that had allowed their ancestors to thrive in such a demanding environment. New communities formed in areas that had previously been considered unsuitable for habitation, while innovative techniques for predicting and avoiding volcanic hazards were developed through the collaborative efforts of their most experienced miners and their wisest elders. The younger generation of Gorons, including a shy but determined youth named Unibo who carried the bloodline of the great Daruk himself, proved that the courage and strength of their ancestors lived on in their hearts even when circumstances seemed to offer little cause for hope. These young Gorons took on responsibilities far beyond what their ages would normally have required, working tirelessly to help their displaced families find new ways to survive and prosper despite the constant threat posed by their corrupted protector. When Link finally awakened from his century of healing sleep and began his quest to cleanse the corrupted divine beasts, the news of his return spread through the scattered Goron communities like the rumble of a distant but hopeful earthquake. Here was someone who had known Daruk personally, who had witnessed his strength and generosity firsthand, and who now possessed the power to free the great champion's spirit from its long imprisonment within the mechanical monster that bore his ancestral name. The preparation for the assault on Vah Rudania required not merely tactical planning, but a deep understanding of both the volcanic environment and the emotional significance of what they were attempting to accomplish. This was not simply a matter of destroying an enemy war machine, but of liberating a beloved friend and restoring balance to geological systems that had been disrupted for an entire century. Yunobo's partnership with Link in planning and executing the attack demonstrated the same kind of courage and determination that had made his ancestor legendary, though it was expressed through a personality that was naturally more cautious and thoughtful than Daruk's boisterous enthusiasm. The young Goron brought to the endeavor his intimate knowledge of the mountain's current conditions and his inherited ability to create protective barriers, while Link contributed the combat skills and magical capabilities that would be necessary to penetrate Vah Rudania's defenses. The actual assault on the divine beast became a testament to the power of legacy and the ways in which courage can be passed down through generations, even when the specific individuals who embodied it are no longer present to provide direct guidance. Every cannon shot that struck Vah Rudania's vulnerable points, every moment of perfect coordination between Link and Unibo as they navigated the treacherous volcanic terrain around the great machine, represented not just tactical skill, but emotional investment in honoring the memory of a fallen hero. When Link finally set foot on Vah Rudania's exterior and began his journey through the corrupted interior spaces, he found himself walking through chambers that had once been filled with the steady glow of controlled thermal energy and the reassuring presence of Daruk's unshakable optimism. Now those same spaces pulsed with malevolent fire, their walls stained with veins of purple corruption that seemed to burn with their own horrible intensity. The puzzles that Link encountered within the divine beast were not merely mechanical challenges, but tests of his understanding of the principles that had guided Vah Rudania's original design. To progress through the corrupted chambers, he had to think like a Goron, to understand volcanic forces not merely as sources of destruction but as natural processes that could be shaped and guided by wisdom and patience. Each terminal that Link activated, each system that he restored to proper function, brought him closer, not only to the central control chamber, but to a deeper appreciation of the incredible feat of engineering and geological harmony that Vah Rudania represented. Even corrupted and turned against its original purpose, the divine beast remained a masterpiece of integrated design, its every component serving multiple functions, while contributing to the elegant unity of the whole. The confrontation with Fireblight Ganon, when it finally came, was perhaps the most emotionally intense of all Link's battles against the corrupted entities that had claimed the divine beasts. This was not merely another enemy to be defeated, but the destroyer of someone whose friendship had meant more to him than he could consciously remember, the corrupter of a machine that had been built with dedication and love by people who deserved better than to see their greatest achievement turned into an instrument of terror. The battle itself tested every aspect of Link's abilities, from his skill with conventional weapons to his mastery of the environmental hazards that filled Vah Rudania's interior chambers. Fireblight Ganon's attacks seemed designed specifically to exploit the tactical approaches that Daruk had used in their first encounter, forcing Link to fight in ways that honored his friend's memory, while avoiding the strategic errors that had led to the Goron champion's defeat. When Fireblight Ganon finally fell and its corrupted essence dispersed into nothingness, the change in Vah Rudania's interior was immediate and profound. The purple veins of malice that had stained every surface faded away like nightmares banished by dawn light, while the gentle, steady glow of properly regulated thermal energy returned to chambers that had known only the harsh fluctuations of corrupted systems for far too long. Daruk's spirit, freed at last from its century of torment, appeared before Link with all the warmth and generous enthusiasm that had made him beloved in life. His greeting carried within it not only joy at their reunion, but profound gratitude for the suffering Link had endured to make this moment possible. He had watched over his little guy throughout his trials, he revealed, his consciousness somehow maintaining awareness of events in the wider world, even while trapped within the corrupted divine beast. The gift that Daruk bestowed upon Link, his protective power, manifested as a barrier that could absorb tremendous amounts of damage while reflecting some of it back upon attackers, represented more than just a practical advantage for the battles that lay ahead. It was a tangible expression of the protective instincts that had defined Daruk's entire existence, a promise that even death could not diminish his desire to shield others from harm. With Vah Rudania cleansed and restored to its proper function, the great divine beast took its position overlooking Hyrule Castle, its massive thermal cannon aimed at the source of the corruption that had claimed it for so long. But more than just a weapon pointed at an enemy stronghold, the great mechanical salamander had become once again what it had always been meant to be: a guardian and protector, a symbol of the enduring power of strength, guided by compassion to triumph over malice and destruction. The restoration of natural volcanic cycles throughout Death Mountain began almost immediately, as Vah Rudania's purified systems worked to undo a century's worth of damage to the mountain's thermal patterns and geological stability. The chaotic eruptions and unpredictable lava flows that had plagued the region for so long gave way to more regular and manageable volcanic activity, while the toxic gases that had made many areas uninhabitable were gradually filtered and neutralized. For the Goron people, the liberation of Vah Rudania represented not merely the removal of a threat, but the return of their homeland itself. Daruk's sacrifice had not been forgotten. His spirit had found peace at last, and the divine beast that bore his ancestral name was once again serving its intended purpose of maintaining the delicate balance between the creative and destructive forces that made their mountain home both challenging, life-sustaining. In the crystalline heights, where the very air itself seems to sing with the endless songs of wind and weather, where towering peaks pierce the clouds like the spears of ancient titans thrust skyward in eternal challenge to the heavens themselves, there stands a monument to both the boundless freedom that defines the Rito people and the incredible vision of the ancient Shaker who learned to capture the essence of flight itself within the confines of mechanical form. This is Var Meadow, the great mechanical bird whose form was chosen not merely for its obvious association with the creatures of the sky, but as a profound tribute to Champion Meadow, that legendary Rito whose mastery of aerial combat had become the standard against which all future warriors of the wind would measure their own achievements. To truly understand the significance of Var Meadow, one must first comprehend the unique relationship that exists between the Rito people and the element that defines their very existence, the wind itself, in all its countless moods and manifestations. For these children of the sky, air is not merely the medium through which they move or the substance that lifts their wings, but something far more fundamental and sacred. It is the physical embodiment of freedom itself, the visible manifestation of the endless possibilities that exist for those brave enough to trust in forces beyond their direct control. The great bird, chosen as the divine beast's form, holds profound spiritual meaning in Rito culture that extends far beyond its obvious ability to soar through the heavens with grace and power. In their most ancient myths and ceremonial songs, the great bird represents the principle of perspective, the understanding that true wisdom comes from the ability to see beyond the immediate concerns that bind earthbound creatures, to perceive patterns and connections that are invisible to those who never rise above the level of the ground. Champion Meadow, for whom the divine beast was named, had embodied these principles during his legendary service to the Rito people in an age so distant that even their cultural memory, preserved in the soaring melodies that accompanied every important ritual and celebration, could maintain only the essence of his character rather than the specific details of his remarkable deeds. What they remembered, what they celebrated, in the complex harmonies that echoed through their mountain aeries, was the spirit of what he had represented. A warrior who understood that true strength comes not from overwhelming force, but from the ability to strike with precision and purpose, from positions that enemies cannot anticipate or counter. The stories told of Champion Meadow spoke of a warrior who could ride the wildest storms as easily as others walked on solid ground, who could loose arrows from distances so great that his targets fell without ever seeing their attacker, and who could navigate by the stars and wind currents with such precision that he never once became lost even in the most challenging weather conditions. He had been, according to these tales, someone who understood that mastery of the skies required not just physical skill, but a deep spiritual connection to the forces that governed weather and wind. When the ancient Sheikah began their monumental undertaking of designing divine beasts that would represent and protect each of Hyrule's major races, the decision to honor Champion Meadow through the bird form war machine represented many months of careful observation and study. Teams of Sheikah engineers and designers spent entire seasons living among the Rito people, learning to understand their unique perspectives on freedom, mobility, and the tactical advantages that came from being able to view any situation from multiple angles. What they discovered was a people whose entire worldview was built around concepts of vision, adaptability, and the understanding that the greatest achievements come from the willingness to see beyond conventional limitations and think in 3 dimensions, rather than being confined to the 2-dimensional thinking that characterized most earthbound races. The Rito had learned, through countless generations of living in harmony with the wind and weather, that true security comes not from building stronger defenses, but from developing the mobility and awareness necessary to avoid threats entirely. This understanding informed every aspect of Var Meadow's design, from the sophisticated aerodynamic principles that allowed it to fly with the same natural grace as any living bird, to the advanced weather monitoring systems that could predict and analyze atmospheric conditions across vast distances with incredible precision and accuracy. The divine beast was not merely built to look like a great bird. It was designed to embody the essential nature of flight itself, to move through the sky with the same effortless mastery that characterized both the legendary raptors and the wind-riding people it was created to protect. The most remarkable aspect of Varmedo's construction was its ability to not just navigate through existing weather patterns, but to actually influence and control atmospheric conditions across enormous areas. The great machine's wing systems were equipped with generators that could create powerful air currents, while its sophisticated sensors could detect and analyze weather formations so distant that they existed beyond the horizon of normal observation. But Varmedo's relationship with atmospheric forces went far beyond its ability to harness them for tactical or strategic purposes. The divine beast could regulate weather patterns to prevent devastating storms while ensuring that the natural cycles of precipitation and wind flow that sustained all life in its region continued to function in perfect balance. In times of peace, it served not as a weapon, but as a guardian of the delicate atmospheric systems that allowed both the mountain ecosystems and the scattered communities below to flourish in harmony. The interior chambers of Varmedo were marvels of both engineering excellence and artistic achievement. Their walls crafted from materials that seemed to capture and hold the very essence of moving air, while remaining solid enough to provide structural integrity despite the enormous stresses of high-altitude flight. Every surface was designed to channel and direct the flow of both atmospheric pressure and spiritual energy, creating an environment where the boundary between the mechanical and the meteorological became so subtle as to be effectively meaningless. Throughout the great machine's interior, currents of perfectly controlled air flowed along channels built into the floor and walls, their gentle whisper and occasional gusts creating an environment that felt more like being inside a living cloud than within any artificial construction. These air currents served practical purposes as well as atmospheric ones, carrying away excess heat from the divine beast's most sensitive systems while providing a constant supply of fresh, perfectly oxygenated air for any occupants. The control chamber at Varmedo's heart was perhaps the most breathtaking space ever created through the collaboration of Sheikah technology and Rito artistry. The walls curved in perfect harmony with the aerodynamic principles that governed efficient flight, while the control systems themselves were integrated so seamlessly into the chamber's design that they seemed to have been shaped by the same wind forces that carved the mountain peaks where the Rito made their homes. From this sacred space, the divine beast's pilot could command not only the great machine's flight systems and weapons arrays, but also its more subtle abilities, the power to influence weather patterns across vast distances, to sense the location and movement of aircraft or flying creatures throughout an enormous area, and to communicate with the wind itself through methods that operated beyond the normal ranges of hearing or sight. When Rivali was chosen to serve as Varmedo's pilot, the selection represented both the natural culmination of a lifetime spent perfecting the arts of aerial combat and the recognition of talents so exceptional that they bordered on the supernatural. From his earliest youth, it had been clear that he possessed not only the flying skills that were common among his people, but something far more rare and remarkable, the kind of intuitive understanding of wind and weather that allowed him to perform maneuvers that other Rito considered physically impossible. Rivali's legendary archery skills were spoken of throughout Hyrule in terms that often sounded more like mythology than factual reporting. Tales of shots so precise and made from such incredible distances that witnesses sometimes assumed they were seeing magic rather than purely physical achievement. He could loose multiple arrows in the time it took most archers to nock and draw a single shot, and each arrow would find its target with deadly accuracy regardless of wind conditions, distance, or the complexity of the flight path required to reach its destination. But perhaps more remarkable than his technical abilities was the absolute confidence with which he approached every challenge. The unwavering certainty that there was no aerial maneuver too difficult for him to master, no target too distant or well protected for his arrows to reach, no opponent so skilled that they could match his combination of speed, precision, and tactical intelligence. His selection as Var Medo's pilot was not only unanimous among those responsible for such decisions, but was actually considered inevitable by anyone who understood the requirements of the role. Yet the honor also carried with it implications that would prove more psychologically challenging than Rivali had anticipated, for it placed him in a position where his individual excellence would be measured not against other Rito warriors, but against the chosen champions of every race in the kingdom. The process by which Rivali learned to interface with his divine beast was unlike anything that had been attempted before in the long history of either Rito or Shaker achievement. It required not merely the mastery of incredibly sophisticated control systems, but the development of an almost mystical connection with the atmospheric forces that powered both the great machine and the weather patterns that surrounded it at any given moment. Rivali would spend countless hours within Var Medo's control chamber, not practicing specific combat techniques or flight maneuvers, but simply learning to feel the rhythm of the wind currents that flowed around and through the divine beast, to sense the subtle changes in atmospheric pressure that preceded weather formations, to understand the ways in which the great machine's mechanical systems interfaced with the natural forces that governed everything from local air currents to regional climate patterns. Gradually, through dedication and natural talent that impressed even the most demanding Sheikah engineers, he achieved something that seemed to transcend normal understanding of what was possible, a true synthesis between his own consciousness and the meteorological intelligence that seemed to exist within the sky itself. When Rivali and Var Medo moved together through the heavens, they did so with a harmony that made it impossible for observers to determine whether Rito's natural abilities ended and the divine beast's mechanical capabilities began. The relationship between Rivali and Link during the months of preparation that preceded the Great Calamity was one of the most complex and psychologically fraught dynamics in all the kingdom's history, a connection that combined genuine respect with fierce rivalry and professional cooperation with deeply personal frustration. Rivali had recognized in the young Hylian knight abilities that commanded his grudging admiration, but he had also seen someone whose reputation seemed to exceed what his actual achievements should have warranted. For Rivali, who had spent his entire life earning recognition through visible, measurable demonstrations of skill that no one could question or dismiss, the way in which Link had seemingly stumbled into legendary status without any comparable display of exceptional ability represented a source of constant irritation. The Rito champion understood that Link was genuinely skilled, but he could not reconcile this acknowledgement with his belief that true greatness should be earned through obvious superiority, rather than quiet competence. The appointment of Link as the wielder of the Master Sword and the fifth member of their group struck Rivali as particularly galling, not because he doubted Link's courage or dedication, but because he believed his own achievements were more spectacular and therefore more deserving of such recognition. The casual way in which others accepted Link's special status without requiring him to prove it through direct competition rankled Rivali's competitive nature in ways that he found difficult to articulate or resolve. When Calamity Ganon finally emerged from its long imprisonment and the carefully orchestrated defense of the kingdom began to unfold according to their meticulously prepared plans, Rivali piloted Var Medo toward his assigned position with a heart full of confidence and anticipation. This would be his opportunity to demonstrate once and for all that his skills were not merely impressive by Rito standards but were genuinely superior to those of any warrior in the kingdom, including the mysterious Hylian champion, whose reputation he had never quite been able to accept. The corruption of Varmado happened with a speed and thoroughness that caught even Rivali's combat-honed reflexes completely off guard. One moment he was soaring through the familiar skies of his homeland, coordinating with his fellow champions through the communication systems that linked all four divine beasts, and the next he found himself trapped within a mechanical prison where every system that should have responded to his commands was operating according to alien purposes that filled him with revulsion and disbelief. The malice that invaded his divine beast was not simply an external enemy to be fought with conventional tactics and superior skill, but something that seemed to corrupt the very essence of flight itself, turning the freedom and perspective that had always been Rivali's greatest assets into sources of vulnerability and confusion. The wind currents that he had learned to read like a familiar language suddenly carried messages of hatred and destruction, while the mechanical systems that had become extensions of his own will began operating according to malevolent intelligence. Windblight Ganon, the entity that had been specifically engineered to counter Rivali's abilities and claim Varmado for the forces of darkness, represented the ultimate perversion of everything the Rito champion held sacred about the nature of aerial combat. Where Rivali struck with precision and purpose, it attacked with chaotic fury. Where he used speed and mobility to maintain tactical advantages, it employed the same capabilities to spread terror and destruction without regard for strategy or honor. The battle that followed was not merely a physical contest, but a philosophical struggle between two fundamentally opposed approaches to the use of power and skill. Rivali fought not just for his own survival or even for the success of their mission against the calamity, but for the principle that true mastery should be used to protect and inspire rather than to dominate and destroy. That excellence carried with it the obligation to lift others up rather than tear them down. His pride, which had always been both his greatest strength and his most significant weakness, became a vulnerability when facing an enemy that had studied his fighting style and prepared specific countermeasures designed to exploit his competitive nature and his need to prove his superiority. Windblight Ganon's attacks seemed calculated to force Rivali into aerial maneuvers that showcased his incredible abilities, while simultaneously leading him into positions where those same abilities became disadvantages. Every attempt to demonstrate the speed and agility that had made him legendary was countered by weapons that seemed designed specifically to target fast-moving opponents. Every effort to use his superior archery skills was thwarted by defenses that turned his own arrows against him, or rendered them ineffective through methods that challenged everything he understood about the physics of projectile flight. Rivali's final moments in life were spent not in the boastful confidence that had characterized so much of his existence, but in a kind of humbled recognition of the limitations that even the greatest individual skill must face when confronted by forces that operate beyond the normal boundaries of combat and competition. His consciousness merged with Varmado's systems in ways that had never been achieved before, his spirit becoming part of the great machine's essence and creating a form of resistance that even Windblight Ganon could not completely eliminate. For 100 years, while Link slept in healing stasis and Princess Zelda held Calamity Ganon at bay through the power of her divine heritage, Rivali's spirit endured within the corrupted divine beast, maintaining a constant struggle against the malice that had claimed his mechanical partner. This was a form of existence that challenged everything he had believed about the nature of achievement and recognition, conscious awareness, trapped within a prison of hatred and corruption, forced to fight a battle that no one would witness or celebrate, where victory would bring no glory and defeat would harm only those he had sworn to protect. The corruption of Varmado created devastating problems for the Rito people that went far beyond the immediate military threat posed by a hostile divine beast operating within their traditional domain. The great machine's weather manipulation abilities, now guided by malevolent intelligence rather than protective wisdom, began to disrupt the atmospheric patterns that had allowed their aerial civilization to flourish for countless generations. The unpredictable wind currents and violent storms that Varmado generated in its corrupted state made traditional flight patterns impossible to navigate safely, effectively trapping the wind-riding people within a much smaller area than they had ever been forced to accept. Young Rito, who should have been learning to soar across vast distances, found themselves confined to short flights within sight of their village, while the messengers and scouts whose mobility had connected scattered communities throughout the region were unable to perform their traditional roles. The weather disruptions also affected the wildlife upon which Rito hunting traditions depended, driving away the fish and small game that had sustained their communities, while making it nearly impossible to predict when and where successful hunts might be conducted. The very seasonal patterns that had governed Rito life for millennia became chaotic and unreliable, leaving families unsure of how to plan for the future or preserve resources for times of scarcity. The Rito people, despite their natural adaptation to challenging aerial environments and their cultural tradition of viewing obstacles as opportunities to demonstrate their superior flying skills, found themselves tested in ways that challenged even their legendary resilience and optimism. Communities that had thrived through their connections to distant regions suddenly found themselves isolated and forced to become self-sufficient in ways their ancestors had never needed to consider. Yet even in these darkest circumstances, the essential character of the Rito people shone through their response to seemingly impossible challenges. Rather than abandoning their aerial homeland or succumbing to despair about their restricted mobility, they adapted with the same creative intelligence that had allowed their ancestors to master the art of flight itself. New communication methods were developed that could function despite the disrupted weather patterns, while innovative hunting and gathering techniques were created to take advantage of the resources that remained available within their reduced range of movement. The warrior Tabor, whose skill with a bow rivaled that of the great Rivali himself, and whose determination to protect his family and community had never wavered despite the seemingly hopeless nature of their situation, emerged as a natural leader during these difficult years. His refusal to accept that the corruption of Varmado represented a permanent defeat inspired others to maintain hope and continue working towards solutions that might seem impossible but were not necessarily unattainable. When Link finally awakened from his century of healing sleep and began his quest to cleanse the corrupted divine beasts, the news of his return spread through Rito village like a wind carrying the promise of storms that would clear the air and restore natural patterns. Here was someone who had known Rivali personally, who had witnessed his incredible skill and complex personality firsthand, and who now possessed the power to free the great champion's spirit from its long imprisonment within the mechanical prison that bore his ancestral name. The preparation for the assault on Varmado required not merely tactical planning and technical expertise, but a deep understanding of both the aerial environment and the emotional significance of what they were attempting to accomplish. This was not simply a matter of destroying an enemy war machine, but of liberating a proud warrior and restoring balance to atmospheric systems that had been disrupted for an entire century. Tiba's partnership with Link in planning and executing the attack demonstrated the same kind of courage and skill that had made Rivali legendary, though it was expressed through a personality that was more focused on practical results than personal recognition. The Rito warrior brought to the endeavor his intimate knowledge of current wind patterns and his exceptional archery abilities, while Link contributed the combat skills and magical capabilities that would be necessary to penetrate Varmedo's aerial defenses and board the great machine. The actual assault on the divine beast became a testament to the power of determination and the ways in which the skills of the past could be honored and continued by new generations of warriors fighting for the same fundamental principles. Every arrow that struck Varmedo's vulnerable points, every moment of perfect coordination between Link and Teba as they navigated the treacherous air currents around the great machine, represented not just tactical expertise, but emotional investment in completing a mission that had been interrupted by tragedy, but never truly abandoned. When Link finally managed to board Varmedo and began his journey through the corrupted interior spaces, he found himself walking through chambers that had once been filled with the steady rush of perfectly controlled air currents and the confident presence of Rivali's unwavering self-assurance. Now those same spaces pulsed with malevolent winds, their walls stained with veins of purple corruption that seemed to move with their own horrible life. The puzzles that Link encountered within the divine beast were not merely mechanical challenges, but tests of his understanding of the principles that had guided Varmedo's original design. To progress through the corrupted chambers, he had to think like a Rito, to understand wind and weather not merely as environmental factors to be overcome, but as forces that could be worked with and guided through wisdom and patience. Each terminal that Link activated, each system that he restored to proper function, brought him closer, not only to the central control chamber, but to a deeper appreciation of the incredible feat of engineering and atmospheric mastery that Varmedo represented. Even corrupted and turned against its original purpose, the divine beast remained a masterpiece of integrated design, its every component serving multiple functions while contributing to the elegant unity of the whole. The confrontation with Windblight Ganon, when it finally came, was perhaps the most technically demanding of all Link's battles against the corrupted entities that had claimed the divine beasts. This was not merely another enemy to be defeated, but the destroyer of someone whose skill and confidence had impressed him despite their personal conflicts, the corrupter of a machine that had been built with precision and artistry by people who understood the true meaning of excellence. The battle itself tested every aspect of Link's abilities, from his skill with ranged weapons to his capacity for three-dimensional thinking. In an environment where attacks could come from any direction, Windblight Ganon's speed and mobility seemed designed specifically to exploit the aerial combat techniques that Rivali had used in their first encounter, forcing Link to fight in ways that honored his rival's memory while avoiding the tactical mistakes that had led to the Rito champion's defeat. When Windblight Ganon finally fell and its corrupted essence dispersed into nothingness, the change in Varmedo's interior was immediate and profound. The purple veins of malice that had stained every surface faded away like storm clouds dispersed by clearing winds, while the gentle, steady flow of properly regulated air currents returned to chambers that had known only the violent turbulence of corrupted systems for far too long. Rivali's spirit, freed at last from its century of torment, appeared before Link with all the confidence and competitive fire that had made him both admirable and infuriating in life. His greeting carried within it not only relief at their reunion, but a kind of grudging respect for the trials Link had endured and the skills he had demonstrated in achieving what even Rivali had not been able to accomplish. The gift that Rivali bestowed upon Link, his mastery of wind currents, manifested as the ability to create powerful updrafts that could provide rapid altitude gain and tactical advantages, represented more than just a practical tool for the battles that lay ahead. It was a tangible expression of the competitive spirit that had defined Rivali's entire existence a promise that even death could not diminish his desire to see excellence properly recognized and rewarded. With Var Meadow cleansed and restored to its proper function, the great divine beast took its position overlooking Hyrule Castle, its massive wind cannons aimed at the source of the corruption that had claimed it for so long. But more than just a weapon pointed at an enemy stronghold, the great mechanical bird had become once again what it had always been meant to be: a guardian and protector, a symbol of the enduring power of skill and determination to triumph over chaos and destruction. The restoration of natural weather patterns throughout the Hebra region began almost immediately, as Var Meadow's purified systems worked to undo a century's worth of damage to atmospheric circulation and seasonal climate cycles. The violent storms and unpredictable wind patterns that had plagued the area for so long gave way to more stable weather conditions, while the dangerous air currents that had made flight hazardous were gradually smoothed and regulated. For the Rito people, the liberation of Var Meadow represented not merely the removal of a threat, but the restoration of their birthright itself. Rivali's sacrifice had been honored. His spirit had found peace at last, and the divine beast that bore his ancestral name was once again serving its intended purpose of maintaining the delicate balance of forces that made their aerial civilization both possible and sustainable. In the endless expanse of golden sand that stretches beyond the horizon like a sea of crystallized sunlight, where the very air shimmers with heat waves that dance between earth and sky in patterns that seem to hold the secrets of eternity itself, there stands a monument to both the indomitable spirit of the Gerudo people and the profound wisdom of the ancient Sheikah, who learned to harness the raw power of the desert's most fearsome forces. This is Var Naboris, the great mechanical camel whose form was chosen not merely for its obvious association with creatures that thrive in the harsh beauty of arid landscapes, but as a profound tribute to Nabooru, that legendary Gerudo, whose mastery of lightning magic had become the foundation upon which her people's understanding of elemental warfare was built. To truly comprehend the significance of Var Naboris, one must first understand the unique relationship that exists between the Gerudo people and the element that defines their existence in ways both practical and spiritual. The desert itself, in all its moods of scorching heat and bitter cold, blinding storms and crystalline clarity. For these daughters of the sand, the desert is not merely the environment in which they live or the landscape they must navigate to survive, but something far more fundamental and sacred. It is the physical manifestation of strength itself, the visible representation of the truth that life's greatest treasures are found not in places of ease and comfort, but in the crucible of challenge and adversity. The great camel, chosen as the divine beast's form, holds profound spiritual meaning in Gerudo culture that extends far beyond its obvious ability to traverse vast distances across terrain that would defeat any other creature. In their most ancient legends and warrior songs, the great camel represents the principle of endurance, the understanding that true strength comes not from overwhelming power or spectacular displays of ability, but from the capacity to continue moving forward, regardless of how difficult the journey becomes or how distant the destination appears. Nabooru, for whom the divine beast was named, had embodied these principles during her legendary service to the Gerudo people in an age so distant that even their cultural memory, preserved in the rhythmic chants that accompanied their training exercises and ceremonial dances, could maintain only the essence of her character rather than the specific details of her extraordinary achievements. What they remembered, what they celebrated in the complex patterns of movement and voice that marked every important gathering, was the spirit of what she had represented: a warrior who understood that true leadership means being willing to face any storm personally before asking others to endure the same hardship. The stories told of Naboru spoke of a warrior who could call down lightning from clear skies with the precision of a master archer, who could navigate by the stars and sand patterns with such accuracy that she never once became lost, even during the most disorienting sandstorms, and who could inspire courage in her followers through the sheer force of her own unwavering determination and unshakable faith in their ability to overcome any obstacle. She had been, according to these tales, someone who understood that mastery of the desert's power required not just physical toughness, but a deep spiritual connection to the forces that governed both weather and the will to survive. When the ancient Sheikah began their monumental task of designing divine beasts that would represent and protect each of Hyrule's major races, the decision to honor Naboru through the camel-form war machine represented many months of careful study and profound respect. Teams of Sheikah engineers and mystics spent entire seasons living among the Gerudo people, learning to endure the harsh conditions of desert life, while gradually coming to understand the complex philosophy that governed their approach to existence, leadership, and the relationship between individual strength and collective survival. What they discovered was a people whose entire worldview was built around concepts of resilience, self-reliance, and the understanding that the greatest victories are achieved not through avoiding hardship, but through transforming challenge into opportunity for growth and strength. The Gerudo had learned, through countless generations of thriving in one of the world's most demanding environments, that true security comes not from seeking shelter from the storm, but from developing the inner resources necessary to dance with lightning itself. This understanding informed every aspect of Varnaboris's design, from the sophisticated electrical systems that could generate and control thunderstorms with the same precision that other machines might manipulate water or fire, to the advanced environmental sensors that could detect and analyze weather patterns, underground water sources, and even seismic activity across distances so vast they seemed to approach the edge of the known world. The divine beast was not merely built to look like a great camel, it was designed to embody the essential nature of desert survival itself, to move through the harshest environments with the same patient determination that characterized both the legendary pack animals and the warrior women it was created to protect. The most remarkable aspect of Varnaboris's construction was its ability to not just survive, but actually draw power from the electrical storms that regularly swept across the desert landscape. The great machine's lightning collection systems were so sophisticated that they could predict the formation of thunderclouds hours before they appeared, position themselves to maximize energy collection, and then store and redirect that power with an efficiency that bordered on the supernatural. But Varnaboris's relationship with electrical forces went far beyond its ability to harness them for destructive purposes. The divine beast could regulate atmospheric electrical activity to prevent dangerous lightning strikes while ensuring that the natural electromagnetic processes that maintained the desert's ecological balance continued to function in perfect harmony. In times of peace, it served not as a weapon, but as a guardian of the delicate electrical systems that governed everything from underground water flow to the migration patterns of desert wildlife. The interior chambers of Varnaboris were marvels of both engineering brilliance and artistic achievement, their walls crafted from materials that seemed to hold and channel electrical energy while remaining perfectly safe for organic beings to touch and navigate around. Every surface was designed to conduct and direct the flow of both electrical current and spiritual energy, creating an environment where the boundary between the mechanical and the meteorological became so subtle as to be effectively invisible. Throughout the great machine's interior, streams of controlled lightning flowed along channels built into the floor and walls, their gentle crackling and occasional bright flashes creating an environment that felt more like being inside a living thunderstorm than within any artificial construction. These electrical currents serve practical purposes as well as atmospheric ones, powering the divine beast's most sophisticated systems while providing a constant source of energy that could be redirected to any critical function during emergency situations. The control chamber at Var Naboris's heart was perhaps the most impressive space ever created through the collaboration of Sheikah technology and Gerudo craftsmanship. The walls curved in perfect harmony with the electromagnetic principles that governed efficient energy flow, while the control systems themselves were integrated so seamlessly into the chamber's design that they seemed to have been shaped by the same electrical forces that carved the distinctive patterns in desert stone during lightning strikes. From this sacred space, the divine beast's pilot could command not only the great machine's movement and weapons systems, but also its more subtle abilities. The power to influence weather patterns across enormous distances, to detect and analyze electrical activity in the atmosphere and underground, and to communicate through electromagnetic pulses that could carry messages across the vast emptiness of the desert, faster than any conventional messenger could travel. When Urbosa was chosen to serve as Var Naboris's pilot, the selection represented both the natural culmination of a lifetime spent mastering the warrior arts that her people held most sacred, and the recognition of a spiritual depth that went far beyond mere combat prowess. From her earliest youth, it had been clear that she possessed not only the fighting skills that were expected of Gerudo nobility, but something far more rare and precious. The kind of wisdom and compassion that made others stronger, simply by being in her presence. Urbosa's legendary mastery of lightning magic was spoken of throughout Hyrule in terms that often bordered on the mythical, tales of displays so spectacular and precise that witnesses sometimes questioned whether they had seen the work of mortal hands or divine intervention. She could call down lightning strikes with the accuracy of a master archer, could generate electrical fields that could disable entire groups of enemies without causing permanent harm to anyone, and could use electromagnetic forces to enhance her own physical abilities in ways that seemed to transcend normal understanding of what was possible. But perhaps more remarkable than her magical abilities was the character that guided their use and the relationships that she had built with people from every corner of the kingdom. Urbosa had been not merely a political ally, but a true friend to Queen of Hyrule, Princess Zelda's beloved mother. Their bond forged through shared experiences and mutual respect that transcended the boundaries between their very different cultures and backgrounds. Her selection as Var Naboris's pilot was not only unanimous among those responsible for such decisions, but was actually celebrated throughout the Gerudo nation as the perfect choice for such an honor. The great warrior women of the desert understood better than anyone else what qualities would be required to form the kind of partnership with a divine beast that would make their combined strength truly formidable, and they recognized in Urbosa someone who possessed all of those qualities in abundance. The process by which Urbosa learned to interface with her divine beast was unlike anything that had been attempted before in the long history of either Gerudo or Sheikah achievement. It required not merely the mastery of incredibly complex control systems, but the development of an almost mystical connection with the electrical forces that powered both the great machine and the storm systems that regularly swept across the desert landscape. Urbosa would spend entire days within Var Naboris's control chamber, not practicing specific combat techniques or mechanical procedures, but simply learning to feel the rhythm of the electrical currents that flowed through both the divine beast and the desert itself, to sense the subtle changes in atmospheric charge that preceded thunderstorm formation, to understand the ways in which the great machine's systems interfaced with the natural electromagnetic fields, that governed everything from underground water detection to long-range communication. Gradually, through dedication and natural talent that impressed even the most experienced Sheikah technicians, she achieved something that seemed to transcend normal understanding of what was possible. A true synthesis between her own consciousness and the electrical intelligence that seemed to exist within the storm systems themselves. When Urbosa and Varnaboris moved together across the desert landscape, they did so with a harmony that made it impossible for observers to determine where the Gerudo warrior's natural abilities ended and the divine beast's technological capabilities began. The relationship between Urbosa and Princess Zelda during the months of preparation that preceded the Great Calamity was one of the most touching and significant bonds in all the kingdom's history, a connection that combined the political alliance between their peoples with something far more personal and meaningful. Urbosa had loved Zelda's mother with the deep affection of a sister, and that love had naturally extended to the young princess who carried within her both her mother's grace and the tremendous burden of powers she could not yet access or understand. For Urbosa, who had never had children of her own, but possessed all the protective instincts of a natural mother, the relationship with Princess Zelda represented something precious and irreplaceable, the opportunity to provide guidance and support to someone whose struggles she understood better than most. The Gerudo chief recognized in the young princess not merely someone who needed protection, but a kindred spirit facing challenges that required both inner strength and the support of those who truly cared about her welfare. The affectionate way in which Urbosa addressed Zelda as her little bird reflected not any condescension, but rather the genuine tenderness of someone who saw great potential that needed nurturing and encouragement rather than criticism or demands for immediate results. Through her words and actions, Urbosa consistently tried to provide the kind of maternal support that Zelda had lost when her mother died, offering both practical advice and emotional comfort during the difficult years when the princess struggled to fulfill her destiny. When Calamity Ganon finally emerged from its long imprisonment and the carefully coordinated defense of the kingdom began to unfold according to their meticulously prepared strategy, Urbosa piloted Varnaboris toward her assigned position with a heart full of determination and protective fury. This battle was not merely about defending the kingdom in abstract terms, but about protecting the young woman she had come to love as a daughter, ensuring that Princess Zelda would have the opportunity to grow into the magnificent leader that Urbosa knew she could become. The corruption of Varnaboris happened with a speed and completeness that caught even Urbosa's battle-hardened reflexes completely unprepared. One moment she was coordinating with her fellow champions through the communication systems that linked all four divine beasts, confident in their preparation and united in their purpose, and the next she found herself trapped within a mechanical prison where every system that should have responded to her commands was operating according to alien purposes that filled her with revulsion and growing dread. The malice that invaded her divine beast was not simply an external enemy to be fought with conventional weapons and superior tactics, but something that seemed to corrupt the very essence of the electrical forces that had always been Urbosa's greatest allies and most reliable sources of power. The lightning that had danced at her command for so many years suddenly turned against her, while the mechanical systems that had become extensions of her own will began operating according to malevolent intelligence that sought only destruction and despair. Thunderblight Ganon, the entity that had been specifically engineered to counter Urbosa's abilities and claim Varnaboris for the forces of darkness, represented the ultimate perversion of everything the Gerudo chief held sacred about the nature of leadership and the responsible use of power. Where Urbosa protected those who could not protect themselves, it struck down the innocent without discrimination. Where she used her strength to build up and inspire, it employed the same capabilities to spread terror and hopelessness among those who most needed hope and encouragement. The battle that followed was not merely a physical contest, but a spiritual struggle between two fundamentally opposed philosophies of existence and power. Urbosa fought not just for her own survival or even for the success of their mission against the calamity, but for the principle that strength should be used in service of others, rather than for selfish gain, that true leadership means accepting responsibility for the welfare of those who depend on your protection and guidance. Her maternal instincts, which had always been one of her greatest strengths as a leader and protector, became a vulnerability when facing an enemy that had studied her personality and prepared specific countermeasures designed to exploit her natural desire to shield others from harm. Thunderblight Ganon's attack seemed calculated to force Urbosa into defensive positions where her protective impulses would work against her tactical advantage, making her vulnerable to counterattacks that she might otherwise have easily avoided. Every attempt to use her signature lightning magic was countered by defenses that seemed specifically designed to turn electrical attacks back upon their source with amplified power and malicious intent. The very forces that had made Urbosa legendary as a warrior were systematically corrupted and redirected until they became weapons aimed at her own destruction, while the mechanical systems of Varnaboris itself were turned into instruments of torture and despair. Urbosa's final moments in life were spent not in despair or anger, but in a kind of fierce determination, as she realized that even in death, she might serve the cause of justice by ensuring that her beloved little bird would somehow find the strength and wisdom necessary to fulfill her destiny. Her consciousness merged with Varnaboris's systems in ways that had never been achieved before, her spirit becoming part of the great machine's essence and creating a form of resistance that even Thunderblight Ganon could not completely eliminate or overcome. For 100 years, while Link slept in healing stasis, and Princess Zelda held Calamity Ganon at bay through the power of her divine heritage, Urbosa's spirit endured within the corrupted divine beast, maintaining a constant struggle against the malice that had claimed her mechanical partner. This was a form of existence that would have broken most souls, conscious awareness trapped within a prison of hatred and corruption, forced to watch helplessly as the young woman she loved like a daughter suffered through a century of struggle and sacrifice that no one should have been asked to endure. The corruption of Varnaboris created catastrophic problems for the Gerudo people that went far beyond the immediate military threat posed by a hostile divine beast operating within their traditional homeland. The great machine's electrical manipulation abilities, now guided by malevolent intelligence rather than protective wisdom, began to disrupt the natural electromagnetic patterns that had sustained both the desert ecosystem and Gerudo civilization for countless generations. The unpredictable lightning storms and massive electrical discharges that Varnaboris generated in its corrupted state made travel across the desert extremely dangerous, effectively cutting off trade routes that had connected the Gerudo nation to the rest of Hyrule for centuries. Merchant caravans that had once crossed the sands with relative confidence now found themselves facing electrical hazards that could kill both people and pack animals instantly, while the communication methods that had allowed scattered communities to coordinate their activities became unreliable or impossible to use safely. The electrical disturbances also affected the underground water sources upon which life in the desert ultimately depended, disrupting the natural flow patterns and electromagnetic guidance systems that many desert creatures used to navigate between oasis communities. Wells that had provided fresh water for generations suddenly went dry or became contaminated, while the subtle magnetic fields that helped both people and animals navigate across seemingly featureless terrain became chaotic and unreliable. The Gerudo people, despite their legendary toughness and their cultural tradition of viewing hardship as an opportunity to demonstrate their superior strength and resourcefulness, found themselves tested in ways that challenged even their remarkable resilience and adaptability. Communities that had prospered through their connections to distant trading partners suddenly found themselves isolated and forced to become completely self-sufficient in ways their ancestors had never needed to consider or prepare for. Yet even in these darkest circumstances, the essential character of the Gerudo people shone through their response to seemingly impossible challenges. Rather than abandoning their desert homeland or surrendering to despair about their isolation from the wider world, they adapted with the same fierce determination that had allowed their ancestors to thrive in such a demanding environment. New methods of travel and communication were developed that could function despite the electrical hazards, while innovative techniques for locating and preserving water were created through the collaborative efforts of their most experienced desert guides and their wisest elders. Chief Riju, thrust into a position of leadership at an age when she should have been learning from more experienced rulers, rather than bearing the full responsibility for her people's welfare, proved herself worthy of her heritage through her combination of youthful courage and wisdom that seemed to come from sources beyond her years. Her refusal to be intimidated by the magnitude of the challenges facing her nation inspired others to maintain hope and continue working towards solutions that might seem impossible, but were not necessarily unattainable. When Link finally awakened from his century of healing sleep and began his quest to cleanse the corrupted divine beasts, the news of his return spread through the scattered Gerudo communities like lightning crossing the desert sky during a thunderstorm. Here was someone who had known Urbosa personally, who had witnessed her strength and compassion firsthand, and who now possessed the power to free the great chief's spirit from its long imprisonment within the mechanical prison that bore her ancestral name. The preparation for the assault on Varna Boris required not merely tactical planning and technical expertise, but a deep understanding of both the desert environment and the emotional significance of what they were attempting to accomplish. This was not simply a matter of destroying an enemy war machine, but of liberating a beloved leader and restoring balance to electromagnetic systems that had been disrupted for an entire century. Before Link could even attempt to approach the corrupted divine beast, however, he first had to prove himself worthy of Gerudo trust by recovering the Thunder Helm from the secret base of the Yiga clan, those fallen Sheikah whose bitterness and resentment had led them to serve the very forces of darkness that their ancestors had once fought against. This mission took him deep into enemy territory, where he faced not supernatural horrors, but people whose pain and anger had corrupted them into willing servants of evil. The battle with Master Koga and his followers represented a different kind of tragedy than the corruption of the divine beasts. Not the perversion of noble purpose by external malice, but the voluntary abandonment of principles and honor by those who should have known better. Yet even in defeating these enemies, Link could recognize echoes of what they might have been if their history had unfolded differently, if fear and resentment had not poisoned their hearts against the very people they should have been protecting. With the Thunder Helm recovered and Chief Riju as his ally, Link was finally able to approach Varna Boris and begin what would prove to be the most challenging assault he had yet attempted against any of the corrupted divine beasts. The Great Camel's electrical attacks were so powerful and unpredictable that they could kill instantly, while its ability to generate massive sandstorms made visibility nearly impossible and navigation extremely treacherous, even for those familiar with desert conditions. The actual battle to board Varna Boris became a testament to the power of courage, guided by wisdom, and the importance of using every available resource to overcome seemingly impossible odds. Every successful strike against the great machine's vulnerable points, every moment of perfect coordination between Link and Chief Riju as they navigated the electrical hazards and shifting sands around their target, represented not just tactical skill but emotional investment in completing a mission that carried personal as well as strategic significance. When Link finally managed to set foot on Var Naboris and began his journey through the corrupted interior spaces, he found himself walking through chambers that had once been filled with the steady hum of controlled electrical systems and the confident presence of Urbosa's unshakable determination. Now those same spaces crackled with malevolent energy, their walls stained with veins of purple corruption that seemed to pulse with their own horrible life and malicious intent. The puzzles that Link encountered within the Divine Beast were not merely mechanical challenges, but tests of his understanding of the principles that had guided Var Naboris' original design. To progress through the corrupted chambers, he had to think like a Gerudo, to understand electrical forces not merely as sources of power to be harnessed, but as natural phenomena that could be worked with and guided through wisdom, patience, and respect for their inherent nature. Each terminal that Link activated, each system that he restored to proper function, brought him closer not only to the central control chamber, but to a deeper appreciation of the incredible feat of engineering and electromagnetic mastery that Var Naboris represented. Even corrupted and turned against its original purpose, the Divine Beast remained a masterpiece of integrated design, its every component serving multiple functions while contributing to the elegant unity of the whole. The confrontation with Thunderblight Ganon, when it finally came, was perhaps the most technically challenging and emotionally intense of all Link's battles against the corrupted entities that had claimed the Divine Beasts. This was not merely another enemy to be defeated, but the destroyer of someone whose strength and wisdom had meant more to him than he could consciously remember. The corrupter of a machine that had been built with dedication and love by people who understood the true meaning of service and sacrifice. The battle itself tested every aspect of Link's abilities, from his skill with conventional weapons to his capacity for adapting to an opponent whose speed and unpredictability seemed to defy normal understanding of what was possible in combat. Thunderblight Ganon's electrical attacks and incredible mobility seemed designed specifically to exploit the combat techniques that Urbosa had used in their first encounter, forcing Link to fight in ways that honored her memory while avoiding the tactical errors that had led to the Gerudo Chief's defeat. When Thunderblight Ganon finally fell and its corrupted essence dispersed into nothingness, the change in Var Naboris' interior was immediate and profound. The purple veins of malice that had stained every surface faded away like storm clouds dispersed by clearing skies, while the gentle, steady flow of properly controlled electrical currents returned to chambers that had known only the violent chaos of corrupted systems for far too long. Urbosa's spirit, freed at last from its century of torment, appeared before Link with all the strength and maternal warmth that had made her beloved not only by her own people, but by everyone who had been fortunate enough to know her personally. Her greeting carried within it not only joy at their reunion, but profound concern for Princess Zelda, whose suffering during the long years of imprisonment had been visible to Urbosa's consciousness, even while trapped within the corrupted Divine Beast. The gift that Urbosa bestowed upon Link, her mastery of lightning magic, manifested as the ability to call down divine judgment from the heavens themselves, represented more than just a powerful weapon for the battles that lay ahead. It was a tangible expression of the protective instincts that had defined her entire existence, a promise that even death could not diminish her desire to see justice done, and the innocent protected from those who would harm them. With Var Naboris cleansed and restored to its proper function, the great Divine Beast took its position overlooking Hyrule Castle, its massive electrical cannons aimed at the source of the corruption that had claimed it for so long. But more than just a weapon pointed at an enemy stronghold, the great mechanical camel had become once again what it had always been meant to be: a guardian and protector, a symbol of the enduring power of wisdom and strength guided by compassion to triumph over hatred and despair. The restoration of natural electromagnetic patterns throughout the Gerudo Desert began almost immediately as Varnaboris's purified systems worked to undo a century's worth of damage to electrical fields and storm cycles. The violent lightning strikes and chaotic electrical discharges that had made travel so dangerous for so long gave way to more predictable weather patterns, while the underground water systems that had been disrupted by electromagnetic interference gradually returned to their natural flow patterns. For the Gerudo people, the liberation of Varnaboris represented not merely the removal of a threat but the restoration of their connection to the wider world and the return of the trade relationships that had sustained their prosperity for countless generations. Urbosa's sacrifice had been honored. Her spirit had found peace at last, and the divine beast that bore her ancestral name was once again serving its intended purpose of protecting the strong while sheltering those who needed guidance and support. In the tapestry of legends that adorns the great halls of memory, where the threads of individual achievement are woven together to create patterns of meaning that transcend the sum of their separate parts, there exists perhaps no more beautiful or profound example of unity in diversity than the story of how 4 divine beasts came to represent not merely the military might of their respective peoples, but the deepest spiritual truth that has always defined the kingdom of Hyrule at its most noble and aspirational. This is the tale of how mechanical marvels became symbols of something far greater than technology or warfare. How they became the physical manifestation of the principle that true strength lies not in any single culture's achievements, but in the harmonious cooperation between peoples who choose to see their differences as sources of complementary power rather than reasons for division or conflict. To understand the profound significance of this unity, one must first appreciate the extraordinary nature of what the ancient Sheikah accomplished when they designed each divine beast to serve as a perfect reflection of the culture and values of the people who would pilot it. These were not merely weapons of war built according to standardized specifications and then assigned to different operators based on convenience or availability, but rather unique works of art and engineering that had been crafted with such attention to cultural detail and spiritual resonance that each machine seemed to have grown naturally from the soil of its intended homeland. Vah Ruta embodied everything that made the Zora people unique among the races of Hyrule, its flowing lines and water-based systems reflecting not only their aquatic nature, but their philosophical understanding that true strength comes from adaptability, persistence, and the willingness to work with natural forces rather than against them. The great mechanical elephant moved through its element with the same graceful power that characterized the Zora themselves. Its every gesture, speaking of dignity, wisdom, and the kind of patient endurance that allows rivers to carve canyons through the hardest stone simply by refusing to give up their chosen path. The selection of Princess Mipha as its pilot represented more than just the recognition of her exceptional abilities as a warrior and healer, but acknowledgement of the way she embodied the finest qualities of her entire race. Her compassion was not weakness, but the highest form of strength. Her healing abilities, not mere magic, but the physical manifestation of the Zora understanding that true power serves life rather than destroying it. When Mipha took her place within Vah Ruta's control chamber, she was not simply operating a machine, but expressing the deepest values of her people through mechanical means. Vah Rudania captured the essential spirit of the Goron people with equal precision and artistry, its heat-resistant construction and volcanic integration, reflecting not only their natural environment, but their philosophical approach to existence itself. The great mechanical salamander embodied the Goron understanding that the most precious things in life are forged in the crucible of hardship. that true friendship is tested by adversity, and that the greatest leaders are those who are willing to face any danger personally before asking others to share the risk. Daruk's selection as the Divine Beast's pilot represented the natural culmination of a lifetime spent demonstrating that physical strength means nothing without the moral courage to use it in service of others. His legendary power was matched only by his legendary kindness, his ability to lift boulders equaled by his capacity to lift spirits, his resistance to heat and flame no greater than his resistance to despair or cynicism. When Daruk merged his consciousness with Var Rudania's systems, he was not merely controlling a war machine, but expressing the Goron understanding that true protection comes from those who are strong enough to be gentle. Varmido soared through the heavens as a perfect expression of everything that defined the Rito people's unique perspective on existence, its aerodynamic perfection and wind-based capabilities, reflecting not only their mastery of flight, but their philosophical understanding that true freedom comes from the ability to see beyond the limitations that constrain earthbound thinking. The great mechanical bird embodied the Rito belief that the highest achievements come from those who are willing to trust in forces beyond their direct control, while taking full responsibility for their own actions and decisions. Rivali's selection as its pilot, despite his complex personality and competitive nature, represented recognition that excellence itself is a form of service when it inspires others to reach for their own highest potential. His pride was not mere vanity, but the natural expression of someone who had achieved genuine mastery through dedication and effort. His competitiveness, not selfishness, but the driving force that had pushed him to develop abilities that could protect others in ways that no one else could match. When Rivali bonded with Varmido's consciousness, he was not simply piloting an aircraft, but expressing the Rito understanding that true leadership means setting an example that others can aspire to follow. Var Neighboris embodied the fierce spirit and protective wisdom of the Gerudo people with breathtaking completeness. Its electrical systems and desert adaptations reflecting not only their harsh environment, but their philosophical understanding that true strength comes from the willingness to stand alone when necessary, while never forgetting one's responsibility to those who depend on protection and guidance. The great mechanical camel moved across the shifting sands with the same patient determination that characterized the Gerudo themselves, its every movement speaking of endurance, wisdom, and the kind of protective instinct that makes a single warrior willing to face an entire army if that is what justice requires. Urbosa's selection as its pilot represented the perfect fusion of individual excellence with maternal wisdom, her legendary combat abilities matched only by her capacity for nurturing and guidance. Her mastery of lightning was not mere magical talent, but the physical expression of the Gerudo understanding that true power serves as a shield for the innocent rather than a sword against the defenseless. When Urbosa integrated her consciousness with Var Naboris's systems, she was not simply commanding a weapon but expressing the Gerudo principle that the strongest warriors are those who fight not for glory or conquest, but for the protection of those they love. The genius of the ancient Sheikah's design philosophy lay not merely in their ability to create machines that reflected the cultures of their intended pilots, but in their deeper understanding that these four very different approaches to existence were not competing philosophies, but complementary aspects of a greater truth. The flowing adaptability of water, the enduring strength of earth and fire, the liberating perspective of wind and sky, the focused power of lightning and storm. These were not alternatives to choose between, but elements that gained their greatest meaning and effectiveness when working together in harmony. This understanding transformed what could have been merely a military alliance between different peoples into something far more profound and spiritually significant. The divine beasts became symbols of unity that transcended mere cooperation, representing instead a vision of what Hyrule could become when its diverse peoples chose to see their differences as sources of mutual enrichment rather than barriers to overcome or threats to defend against. The tragedy that befell the champions and their divine beasts during the Great Calamity was not merely a military defeat, but a spiritual catastrophe that struck at the very heart of this vision of unity. When Calamity Ganon corrupted the great machines and turned them against their own people, it was not simply claiming powerful weapons for its own use, but perverting the physical symbols of interracial cooperation and transforming them into instruments of division and terror. Each corrupted divine beast became a twisted mockery of what it had originally represented, its noble purpose inverted into something that spread fear and suffering rather than protection and hope. Vah Ruta's life-giving waters became floods that threatened to drown entire communities. Vah Rudania's protective strength became chaotic destruction that made the Goron's homeland uninhabitable. Vah Meadow's liberating flight became a prison of storms that trapped the Rito within a fraction of their traditional range. Vah Naboris's just lightning became indiscriminate electrical death that isolated the Gerudo from the rest of the world. The corruption of the divine beasts represented more than just the loss of powerful allies in the fight against ancient evil. It symbolized the apparent failure of the very principle of unity upon which Hyrule's greatest achievements had been built. The machines that should have been proof that different peoples could work together toward common goals instead became evidence that such cooperation was fragile and could be turned against itself by sufficiently malevolent forces. Yet in this darkest hour, when the symbols of unity had been transformed into instruments of division, the true strength of the bonds between Hyrule's peoples began to reveal itself in ways that transcended any mechanical manifestation. The scattered survivors of each race did not retreat into isolation or turn against each other in blame and recrimination, but instead found new ways to maintain the connections and mutual support that the divine beasts had originally been built to represent and protect. Zora healers continued to offer their services to refugees from other races, despite the danger posed by their own corrupted protector. Goron miners shared their knowledge of safe shelter and their skill at working with limited resources, even as their traditional way of life crumbled around them. Rito messengers risked their lives to maintain communication between isolated communities, refusing to let the corruption of Vah Meadow completely sever the bonds that held the kingdom together. Gerudo warriors extended their protection to trade routes and refugee camps far beyond their traditional territory, embodying Urbosa's legacy even in her absence. When Link finally awakened and began his quest to cleanse the corrupted divine beasts, his mission represented more than just the elimination of dangerous enemies or the recovery of powerful weapons. Each divine beast that he purified was a symbol of unity restored, a manifestation of the principle that the bonds between Hyrule's peoples were stronger than any force that sought to divide them, that cooperation and mutual respect could triumph over hatred and corruption. The fact that Link, a Hylian, was the one chosen to free each divine beast from the malice that had claimed it carried profound symbolic significance that went beyond mere military necessity. The Hylians had always served as the connecting tissue that bound Hyrule's diverse peoples together, their natural adaptability and diplomatic instincts making them ideal mediators between different cultures and philosophies. Link's success in understanding and operating within each divine beast demonstrated that the barriers between races were artificial constructs that could be transcended by anyone willing to approach other cultures with respect, empathy, and genuine desire to understand rather than judge. His liberation of Vah Ruta required him to think like a Zora, to understand water not merely as a physical substance but as a metaphor for the flow of life itself. His success in cleansing Var Rudania demanded that he embrace the Goron philosophy of patient endurance and protective strength. His conquest of Var Meadow forced him to adopt the Rito perspective of three-dimensional thinking and strategic mobility. His victory over Varnaboris's corruption required him to channel the Gerudo understanding of focused power guided by protective wisdom. In each case, Link's triumph came not from imposing his own cultural perspective on alien systems, but from temporarily becoming something more than just a Hylian warrior, becoming instead a bridge between cultures, a living embodiment of the unity principle that the divine beasts had originally been created to represent. His ability to connect with the spirit of each fallen champion demonstrated that the bonds forged between the original pilots transcended death itself, that true friendship and mutual respect create connections that cannot be severed by corruption or malice. The cleansing of each divine beast created ripples of healing that extended far beyond the immediate tactical advantages of having powerful allies restored to proper function. As Varuta resumed its role as guardian of natural water cycles, communities throughout the region began to rebuild their lives around restored rivers and lakes. When Var Rudania returned to its purpose as protector of volcanic harmony, Goron families began to return to ancestral homes that had been abandoned for generations. The liberation of Var Meadow restored not just safe flight paths, but the Rito's traditional role as messengers and scouts connecting distant communities. The purification of Varnaboris reopened trade routes and communication networks that had been severed for a century. Each restored divine beast became not merely a weapon aimed at Hyrule Castle, but a beacon of hope that demonstrated the possibility of healing and renewal even after the most devastating tragedies. They proved that corruption was not permanent, that unity could be restored, that the bonds between peoples were stronger than the forces that sought to tear them apart. The final coordinated assault on Hyrule Castle, when all four cleansed divine beasts turned their weapons toward the source of the corruption that had claimed them, represented the culmination of everything the ancient Sheikah had envisioned when they first conceived these magnificent machines. This was not merely a military attack, but a spiritual statement, a declaration that the forces of unity and cooperation would not be permanently defeated by hatred and division. The sight of the four great machines working together in perfect coordination, their massive energy beams converging on their ancient enemy, with precision that spoke of both technological excellence and spiritual harmony, fulfilled the original vision of what could be achieved when Hyrule's diverse peoples chose to combine their greatest strengths in service of shared values and common goals. Mipha's healing compassion, Daruk's protective strength, Rivali's inspired excellence, and Urbosa's maternal wisdom, all of these qualities, embodied in mechanical form and guided by the spirits of their original champions, struck simultaneously at the heart of the evil that had sought to turn their greatest achievements against themselves. The attack succeeded not merely because of its overwhelming power, but because it represented the triumph of unity over division, cooperation over corruption, love over hatred. In that moment of coordinated assault, the divine beasts transcended their roles as individual weapons or cultural symbols and became something greater physical manifestations of the truth that had always defined Hyrule at its best, the understanding that diversity is strength when guided by wisdom, that different perspectives enhance rather than threaten each other, that the whole created by genuine cooperation is infinitely greater than the sum of its individual parts. The legacy of this unity would endure long after the immediate crisis had passed, continuing to influence how the people of Hyrule understood themselves and their relationships with each other. The cleansed divine beasts served as permanent reminders that the bonds between cultures could survive any test, that cooperation based on mutual respect and shared values was stronger than any force that sought to divide or corrupt. They proved that the ancient Sheikah's vision had been more than mere idealism, it had been prophecy, a glimpse of what was possible when people chose to build bridges instead of walls, when they saw in their differences opportunities for mutual enrichment rather than sources of conflict or competition. The divine beasts stood as eternal symbols of the principle that unity does not require uniformity, that strength comes from diversity when guided by wisdom and shaped by love. In the quiet moments after victory, when the great machines took their positions as guardians once more, they served not just as protectors of the physical realm, but as spiritual beacons reminding all who saw them that the greatest achievements of any civilization come not from the dominance of a single culture, but from the harmonious cooperation of many, each contributing their unique gifts to the creation of something more beautiful and enduring than any could achieve alone. In the delicate web of interconnected relationships that binds all living things together in patterns too complex for mortal minds to fully comprehend, where every action sends ripples through dimensions both seen and unseen, there exists perhaps no more profound example of the harmony between artificial creation and natural order than the role played by the divine beasts in maintaining the spiritual and ecological balance of Hyrule itself. These magnificent machines were never intended to exist as isolated instruments of war, separate from and superior to the natural world they were built to protect, but rather as integral components of a living ecosystem, where the boundaries between mechanical and organic, artificial and natural had been so skillfully dissolved that they became meaningless distinctions. To understand the true relationship between the divine beasts and the natural world of Hyrule, one must first appreciate the profound wisdom that guided the ancient Sheikah in their approach to technology itself. These shadow folk had achieved something that would seem impossible to later generations. They had learned to create machines that enhanced rather than disrupted natural processes, devices that worked with the fundamental forces of existence rather than attempting to dominate or replace them. The ancient Sheikah understood that true technological advancement meant learning to listen to the voice of nature itself and creating tools that amplified and refined natural processes rather than competing with them or attempting to substitute artificial solutions for organic systems. Their greatest achievements were not monuments to their ability to impose their will upon the world, but demonstrations of their capacity to work in partnership with forces far greater and wiser than any individual mind could encompass. This philosophy permeated every aspect of the divine beast's design and function, transforming them from mere weapons into what could only be described as mechanical organs within the greater body of Hyrule's living ecosystem. Each great machine served multiple roles that extended far beyond their obvious military capabilities, functioning as regulators, protectors, and nurturers of the natural systems that sustained all life within their respective domains. Vah Ruta's relationship with the aquatic ecosystems of Hyrule represented perhaps the most obvious but also the most sophisticated example of this integration between mechanical intelligence and natural wisdom. The great mechanical elephant did not simply manipulate water for tactical purposes, but served as a living component of the hydrological cycle itself, its presence ensuring that precipitation patterns remained stable, that underground aquifers were properly recharged, and that the delicate balance between fresh and salt water was maintained in coastal regions. The divine beast sensors could detect changes in water quality across vast distances, identifying pollution or contamination long before it could spread to levels that might threaten wildlife or human communities. Its purification systems could cleanse entire rivers of toxins, while its distribution networks could redirect water from areas of abundance to regions suffering from drought, all without disrupting the natural flow patterns that countless species depended upon for their survival and reproductive cycles. But Varuta's influence extended beyond mere water management into the realm of what could only be called spiritual ecology. The great machine's presence seemed to strengthen the connection between all water-based life forms, creating a network of communication and mutual support that operated through means that transcended normal understanding. Fish swam in more coordinated schools, aquatic plants grew in more harmonious patterns, and even the Zora people themselves found their natural empathic abilities enhanced when their divine beast was functioning properly. Varudania's integration with the volcanic systems of Death Mountain demonstrated an even more complex relationship between mechanical intelligence and geological forces. The great salamander did not simply harness volcanic energy for its own purposes, but served as a crucial component in regulating the mountain's internal pressures and thermal cycles, ensuring that eruptions occurred in patterns that enriched rather than destroyed the surrounding landscape. The divine beast's deep core sensors could detect changes in magma flow and gas pressure weeks or even months before they would manifest as surface phenomena, allowing it to make subtle adjustments that prevented dangerous buildups while ensuring that the natural processes of mountain building and soil enrichment continued according to their proper cycles. Its thermal regulation systems could redirect excess heat to areas where it would promote plant growth or mineral formation, while cooling regions that might otherwise become uninhabitable. The presence of Varudania seemed to strengthen the entire mountain ecosystem in ways that operated beyond mere temperature control. The unique plant species that thrived in volcanic soil grew more abundantly and produced more potent medicinal compounds. The heat-loving creatures that made the mountain slopes their home displayed more complex social behaviors and greater resilience to environmental changes. Even the Goron people themselves found their natural resistance to heat and their ability to work with molten materials enhanced when their divine beast was functioning in harmony with the mountain's geological rhythms. Varmado's role in maintaining atmospheric and weather systems represented perhaps the most subtle, but also the most far-reaching example of divine beast integration with natural forces. The great mechanical bird did not simply fly through existing weather patterns, but served as an active participant in their formation and guidance, helping to ensure that seasonal changes occurred smoothly and that extreme weather events were moderated before they could cause widespread destruction. The divine beast's atmospheric sensors could detect pressure changes and wind pattern shifts across distances that spanned entire continents, while its wing systems could generate air currents that influenced cloud formation and precipitation patterns with incredible precision. It could strengthen beneficial weather systems while dissipating dangerous storms, guide migrating birds along safer routes while ensuring that pollinating insects reached their destinations at optimal times. The presence of Varmado seemed to enhance the connection between all aerial life forms, creating a network of atmospheric awareness that operated through means beyond normal sensory perception. Birds flew in more efficient formations, their migrations timed more precisely with seasonal changes. Wind-dispersed seeds found more suitable growing conditions, while airborne pollens achieved more successful fertilization rates. The Rito people themselves found their natural weather sense heightened and their flying abilities enhanced when their divine beast was maintaining proper atmospheric harmony. Var Naboris's relationship with the desert ecosystem demonstrated the most challenging but perhaps most impressive example of technological integration with natural forces. The great camel did not simply endure the harsh conditions of the desert, but served as a crucial component in maintaining the delicate balance between creation and destruction that allowed life to flourish in one of the world's most demanding environments. The divine beast's electrical systems worked in harmony with the natural electromagnetic fields that governed everything from underground water detection to mineral formation ensuring that the subtle energy patterns that guided desert life remained stable and predictable. Its storm generation capabilities could bring precisely controlled precipitation to areas that needed water, while its lightning strikes could trigger specific chemical processes that enriched soil and promoted the growth of hardy desert plants. The presence of Varna boreas seemed to strengthen the entire desert ecosystem's ability to conserve and efficiently utilize limited resources. Cacti and other desert plants produced more water-rich fruits and more potent protective compounds. Desert animals displayed more sophisticated water conservation behaviors and more efficient methods of finding scarce resources. The Gerudo people themselves found their natural resistance to heat and their ability to navigate trackless terrain enhanced when their divine beast was functioning in harmony with the desert's electromagnetic patterns. The corruption of the divine beasts during the Great Calamity created ecological disasters that went far beyond the immediate military threat posed by hostile war machines. Each corrupted divine beast became a source of spiritual pollution that disrupted the natural systems it had been designed to protect and nurture, creating cascading effects that spread throughout their respective ecosystems like infections that attacked the very foundation of life itself. The corruption of Vah-Ruta transformed the great machine from a guardian of water purity into a source of hydrological chaos that threatened every aquatic ecosystem within hundreds of miles of its position. The endless torrential rains it generated were not the gentle, life-giving precipitation that the region needed, but acidic deluges that poisoned soil and water alike. The floods it created destroyed spawning grounds and nesting sites that had supported countless species for millennia, while the disruption of natural flow patterns left some areas completely desiccated while drowning others under toxic waters. Fish populations crashed as their breeding cycles were disrupted and their food sources contaminated. Aquatic plants withered despite the abundance of water because the corrupted precipitation carried minerals and compounds that were harmful rather than nourishing. The Zora people themselves found their natural empathic connections to water-based life forms transformed into sources of constant pain and confusion, as they sensed the suffering of every creature affected by their corrupted protector. The corruption of Vah-Rudania turned the great salamander from a regulator of volcanic forces into a source of geological chaos that made large portions of Death Mountain uninhabitable, even for the heat-resistant Goron people. The erratic volcanic activity it generated created not the controlled eruptions that enriched soil and created valuable minerals, but explosive outbursts that spread toxic gases and destroyed established ecosystems. The disruption of natural thermal cycles killed heat-loving plant species that had taken centuries to establish, while creating dangerous instabilities that threatened the mountain's structural integrity. The unique creatures that had adapted to life in volcanic environments found their carefully balanced physiologies disrupted by temperature fluctuations that their evolutionary programming could not accommodate. Medicinal plants that had grown in volcanic soil for generations either died completely or mutated into forms that were useless or even harmful. The Goron people themselves found their natural geological sense overwhelmed by chaotic signals that made traditional mining and navigation techniques unreliable or dangerous. The corruption of Varmedo transformed the great bird from a guardian of atmospheric harmony into a source of meteorological chaos that disrupted weather patterns across vast areas of Hyrule. The violent storms and unpredictable wind currents it generated prevented normal seasonal transitions and made it impossible for migratory species to follow their traditional routes. The disruption of pressure systems and air currents created dead zones where plants could not receive adequate pollination and areas of violent turbulence that were too dangerous for any flying creature to navigate. Bird populations crashed as their migration patterns were disrupted and their nesting sites destroyed by unpredictable weather. Wind-dispersed plant species failed to reproduce successfully as their seeds were either trapped in dead air or scattered by violent gusts to areas where they could not survive. The Rito people themselves found their natural weather sense confused by contradictory atmospheric signals, while their flying abilities were compromised by air currents that changed direction without warning. The corruption of Var Naboris transformed the great camel from a guardian of desert balance into a source of electromagnetic chaos that disrupted the subtle energy patterns that allowed life to persist in arid environments. The violent electrical storms it generated were not the precisely controlled lightning strikes that triggered beneficial chemical processes, but chaotic discharges that sterilized soil and destroyed the underground water systems that desert life depended upon. The disruption of natural electromagnetic fields made it impossible for desert animals to navigate or locate water sources, while interfering with the plant processes that concentrated and conserved moisture. Desert ecosystems that had taken millennia to establish in perfect balance with limited resources collapsed as their fundamental organizing principles were disrupted by chaotic energy fields. Cacti and other desert plants lost their ability to sense and conserve water efficiently, while desert animals found their natural navigation abilities compromised by electromagnetic interference. The Gerudo people themselves discovered that their traditional methods of desert survival were unreliable when the electromagnetic patterns they depended upon for navigation and resource location became unpredictable. The healing process that began when Link cleansed each divine beast involved far more than simply restoring mechanical function to corrupted war machines. Each purification represented the restoration of spiritual and ecological harmony to an entire regional ecosystem, the healing of wounds that had festered for a century and affected every living thing within vast areas of Hyrule's landscape. The restoration of Vah Ruta's proper function initiated a process of hydrological healing that spread like ripples across every water system in the region. Rivers that had been polluted by acidic rains began to clear as the divine beast's purification systems worked to neutralize toxins and restore natural mineral balances. Underground aquifers that had been contaminated or disrupted began to flow in their proper patterns, while coastal areas saw the return of normal tidal cycles and salinity levels. Fish populations began to recover as spawning grounds were restored and natural food chains re-established. Aquatic plants that had struggled to survive in polluted waters began to flourish once more as they received the proper nutrients and minerals they needed for healthy growth. The Zora people found their empathic connections to water-based life forms restored to their natural harmony, allowing them to sense the gradual healing of ecosystems that had suffered for generations. The purification of Vah Rudania triggered a process of geological stabilization that gradually restored Death Mountain to its proper volcanic rhythms. The chaotic eruptions and toxic gas emissions that had made large areas uninhabitable gave way to controlled releases of pressure that enriched soil and created valuable mineral deposits, according to patterns that had been established over thousands of years. Thermal cycles returned to their natural fluctuations, while underground magma flows resumed their proper courses. Heat-loving plant species that had been driven to near extinction began to re-establish themselves in areas where proper growing conditions had been restored. The unique creatures that had evolved to thrive in volcanic environments found their physiologies returning to normal function as temperature patterns became predictable once more. The Goron people discovered that their natural geological sense had been restored to full sensitivity, allowing them to resume traditional mining and crafting techniques that had been impossible during the century of chaos. The restoration of Var Meadow's atmospheric functions initiated a process of meteorological healing that gradually re-established normal weather patterns across enormous areas of Hyrule. Seasonal transitions returned to their natural rhythms, while storm systems resumed their beneficial roles in distributing moisture and regulating temperatures. Air pressure systems stabilized while wind patterns returned to the reliable flows that had guided migrating species for countless generations. Bird populations began to recover as migration routes were re-established and nesting sites became safe for use once more. Wind-dispersed plant species found their reproductive cycles restored to normal function, while pollinating insects could once again follow predictable patterns in their essential work. The Rito people found their natural weather sense restored to full acuity, while their flying abilities were enhanced by the return of reliable air currents and thermal columns. The purification of Varnaboris triggered a process of electromagnetic rebalancing that gradually restored the subtle energy patterns that allowed desert life to function with maximum efficiency. The chaotic electrical storms that had disrupted underground water systems gave way to precisely controlled lightning strikes that enhanced soil chemistry and promoted the growth of hardy desert plants. Natural electromagnetic fields resumed their proper patterns, while the energy networks that connected all desert life forms were re-established. Desert plant species that had lost their ability to efficiently conserve water found their natural functions restored as electromagnetic conditions returned to normal. Desert animals regained their ability to navigate vast distances and locate scarce resources through their electromagnetic sensing capabilities. The Gerudo people discovered that their traditional survival skills were once again reliable as the energy patterns they depended upon resumed their ancient rhythms. The fully restored divine beasts served not merely as powerful weapons aimed at Hyrule Castle, but as the central components of a vast ecological support system that maintained the spiritual and physical health of the entire kingdom. Their presence created a network of environmental monitoring and regulation that operated continuously, ensuring that natural systems remained in balance while providing early warning of any threats that might disrupt the delicate relationships between all forms of life. This network demonstrated the ultimate achievement of ancient Sheikah wisdom, the creation of technology that enhanced, rather than replaced, natural processes, machines that served as partners rather than masters, in the great work of maintaining the conditions that allowed life to flourish in all its countless forms. The divine beasts proved that true technological advancement lay not in the conquest of nature, but in learning to work in harmony with forces far greater and wiser than any artificial intelligence could hope to match. In the quiet moments between sleeping and waking, when consciousness drifts in the space between dreams and awareness, those who understood the true nature of the divine beasts could sense their presence as more than mere machines, as guardians and nurturers, whose ceaseless vigil ensured that the sun would continue to rise on a world where every creature, from the smallest insect to the mightiest dragon, could find its proper place in the great web of existence that connected all things in bonds of mutual dependence and infinite possibility. In the vast tapestry of legends and chronicles that stretch across the countless ages of Hyrule's history, where threads of truth and myth become so interwoven that separating one from the other becomes an exercise in futility rather than wisdom, there exist tantalizing glimpses of divine beast-like constructs and mechanical guardians whose existence suggests that the four great machines we know were not unique aberrations, but rather part of a much larger pattern of technological and spiritual achievement that spans dimensions, timelines, and realms of existence that mortal minds can barely begin to comprehend. To understand the true scope of divine beast influence and legacy, one must first acknowledge that the ancient Sheikah were not the only civilization to achieve the miraculous synthesis of mechanical precision and spiritual power that made such constructs possible. Throughout the scattered chronicles and fragmented records that have survived from ages beyond memory, there are references to similar beings and machines that served roles remarkably parallel to those fulfilled by Varuta, Vahrudanya, Vahmadoh, Envahnaboris, though their specific forms and capabilities were shaped by the unique needs and characteristics of the peoples who created them. In the distant reaches of time, where history gives way to legend, and legend dissolves into the realm of pure possibility, there are whispered tales of great mechanical creatures that walked beneath the waves of primordial oceans, their forms resembling enormous sea turtles whose shells contained entire cities, protected by barriers of living water that could turn aside any attack while providing sanctuary for those who dwelled within. These oceanic divine beasts, if indeed they ever existed, were said to serve as mobile havens for aquatic peoples whose names have been lost to time, but whose achievements in harmonizing with the deepest mysteries of water and tide rivaled even those of the Zora in their most enlightened eras. The legends speak of how these sea-dwelling constructs could dive to the very bottom of the deepest trenches, where they would commune with forces so ancient and powerful that they predated the current configuration of land and sea itself. From these primordial depths, they would return bearing knowledge and resources that could sustain entire civilizations through ages of abundance and growth, their mechanical hearts beating in rhythm with the pulse of tidal forces that governed the movement of all water throughout the world. In the scorching wastes that exist beyond even the harsh beauty of the Gerudo Desert, travelers' tales speak of colossal mechanical phoenixes whose wings span distances measured not in yards but in miles, their flight paths tracing patterns across the sky that influence weather systems across entire continents. These fireborn divine beasts, if the stories can be believed, serve as guardians of flame itself, ensuring that the balance between creation and destruction is maintained across all realms where fire serves as both life-giver and destroyer. The chronicles describe how these aerial titans can rise from pools of molten rock as easily as birds take flight from still water, their forms wreathed in flames that burn without consuming, their presence bringing not destruction but purification to lands that have been corrupted by forces that oppose the natural order of renewal and growth. Their songs, heard only by those who have learned to listen with more than mortal ears, are said to carry melodies that can heal spiritual wounds and restore hope to hearts that have been darkened by despair beyond normal remedy. In the frozen reaches where ice and snow create landscapes of such pristine beauty that they seem to exist beyond the normal boundaries of the physical world, there are tales of great mechanical dragons whose crystalline forms reflect and amplify the aurora lights that dance across polar skies. These ice-born divine beasts are described as guardians of memory itself, their crystal matrices serving as repositories for knowledge and experiences that span eons of accumulated wisdom. The legends claim that these frozen titans can preserve within their bodies not merely information but actual experiences, complete with emotional resonance and spiritual significance intact, creating libraries of lived knowledge that could be accessed by those deemed worthy of such profound gifts. Their breath is said to create not destructive blizzards but gentle snows that carry within each flake a fragment of wisdom gleaned from ages past, their presence bringing clarity of thought and purity of purpose to those who encounter them in their remote domains. In the deepest underground realms, where stone and crystal formations create cathedrals that rival anything built by surface dwellers, miners and explorers speak in hushed tones of enormous mechanical moles whose diamond-tipped claws can carve through the hardest rock as easily as scribes write upon parchment. These subterranean divine beasts are described as architects of the underground world, their tunneling creating not random excavations but carefully planned networks that follow the natural flow of underground waters and mineral veins. The stories tell of how these earthborn constructs work in harmony with geological forces to create stable underground cities and transportation networks that connect distant regions through passages so precisely engineered that they enhance rather than disrupt the natural structures of mountain and bedrock. Their presence is said to strengthen the foundations of the surface world while providing access to mineral wealth and underground water sources that would otherwise remain forever beyond reach. Even more intriguing than these distant legends are the documented references found within ancient Sheikah archives to prototype divine beasts that preceded the four great machines by centuries or even millennia. These experimental constructs, whose names and specific capabilities have been lost to deliberate destruction of records during the Great Purges, apparently served as testing grounds for technologies and spiritual techniques that would eventually be perfected in the creation of Vah-Ruta, Vah-Rudania, Vah-Medoh, and Vah-Naboris. The fragmentary records that survive suggest that these prototype divine beasts took forms that were less culturally specific than their successors, their designs focusing more on pure functional capability than on symbolic representation of particular peoples or philosophies. One such machine is described as resembling a great mechanical spider, whose 8 legs could move independently across any terrain, while its central body housed systems capable of manufacturing smaller guardian constructs in numbers that could defend entire regions against invasion. Another prototype is mentioned as taking the form of an enormous mechanical tree, whose roots could extend for miles beneath the surface, while its branches reached heights that allowed observation across vast distances. This construct apparently served as both a communication hub and a resource distribution center, its route networks carrying messages and materials between distant communities, while its canopy provided shelter and guidance for aerial creatures and flying peoples. Perhaps most intriguing of all is a brief mention of a prototype divine beast that took no permanent physical form, but instead existed as pure energy that could inhabit and animate any sufficiently complex mechanical system. This shape-shifting construct was apparently capable of taking control of guardian networks, ancient shrine mechanisms, and even simpler devices like Sheikah slate functions, multiplying its effective presence across the entire kingdom, while maintaining a single controlling intelligence that could coordinate activities on an unprecedented scale. The influence of divine beast technology extended far beyond the borders of Hyrule itself, as evidenced by reports from traders and travelers who speak of mechanical marvels in distant lands that clearly demonstrate principles and techniques that parallel those developed by the ancient Sheikah. In the far northern reaches, where the sun sets for months at a time during the darkest season, there are accounts of great mechanical polar bears, whose white fur consists of fiber optics that can collect and store light during the brief summer months, then redistribute that illumination throughout the long polar night. In the eastern archipelagos, where chains of volcanic islands create stepping stones across vast oceanic distances, sailors tell of mechanical dolphins that serve as living bridges between islands, their bodies extending into temporary spans that allow safe passage across treacherous waters, while their sonar capabilities guide ships away from underwater hazards and towards safe harbors. In the southern jungles, where the canopy grows so thick that sunlight rarely reaches the forest floor, explorers describe mechanical jaguars whose spotted coats can photosynthesize like plant leaves, their presence creating mobile oases of breathable air and purified water that allow deeper exploration of regions that would otherwise be completely inaccessible to travelers from less tropical climates. The philosophical implications of these widespread mechanical guardians suggest that the relationship between technology and spirituality that the ancient Sheikah achieved was not unique to their particular culture, but rather represents a fundamental principle of existence that can be discovered and applied by any civilization that develops sufficient wisdom and technical capability. This understanding opens the possibility that divine beast-like constructs might exist in realms and dimensions that have no direct connection to Hyrule, their forms and functions adapted to the specific needs of whatever peoples or environments they were created to serve. The question of whether additional divine beasts might exist in unexplored regions of Hyrule itself has fascinated scholars and adventurers for generations, though concrete evidence remains frustratingly elusive. The kingdom's geography includes vast areas that have never been thoroughly mapped or explored. From the deepest ocean trenches to the highest mountain peaks, from underground cavern systems that extend for unknown distances to aerial realms that exist above the normal range of flight. Theoretical considerations suggest that if the ancient Sheikah truly understood the principles that govern divine beast creation, they would likely have applied those principles to environmental challenges beyond those addressed by the four known machines. The deep ocean environments that surround Hyrule's coastal regions would benefit from mechanical guardians capable of monitoring and maintaining marine ecosystems, while high-altitude zones might require aerial constructs designed to regulate atmospheric conditions at altitudes beyond the range of normal weather systems. Underground realms, particularly the extensive cave networks that connect different regions of the kingdom, might house divine beasts designed to monitor seismic activity and mineral distribution, while maintaining the stability of subterranean water systems that feed surface springs and rivers. The polar regions that exist at the extreme northern and southern boundaries of known geography might contain ice-adapted constructs whose presence ensures that global climate patterns remain stable despite seasonal variations and long-term environmental changes. The potential for future divine beast development raises profound questions about the ethical implications of creating mechanical beings that possess consciousness and emotional capacity comparable to that of organic life forms. The original champion's ability to bond spiritually with their divine beasts suggests that these machines were not merely sophisticated tools, but genuine partners in the great work of protecting and nurturing the world they shared. If future generations were to attempt the creation of new divine beasts, they would need to grapple with questions about the rights and responsibilities that such consciousness-bearing machines would possess, the nature of the relationships between organic and mechanical intelligence, and the long-term implications of sharing the world with artificial beings whose capabilities might eventually exceed those of their creators. The speculative possibility of divine beasts that could adapt and evolve over time, learning from their experiences and developing new capabilities through interaction with their environments and the beings they were created to protect, opens even more complex philosophical territories. Such constructs might eventually transcend their original programming and purposes, becoming independent agents whose goals and methods might diverge from those envisioned by their creators. The relationship between divine beast technology and the mysterious Zonai civilization that predated even the ancient Sheikah presents another fascinating avenue for speculation and research. The architectural and technological remnants left by the Zonai demonstrate mastery of principles that parallel many aspects of divine beast design, particularly in their integration of mechanical systems with spiritual and natural forces. The dragon-headed structures and spiral patterns that characterize Zonai ruins suggest a culture that understood the deep connections between form and function, between symbolic representation and practical application that were later perfected in divine beast design. The possibility that Zonai knowledge influenced or even provided the foundation for ancient Sheikah achievements raises intriguing questions about the continuity of technological and spiritual wisdom across different civilizations and time periods. Some scholars have proposed that the divine beasts represent not the pinnacle of ancient Sheikah achievement, but rather their attempt to recreate or improve upon Zonai constructs whose original forms and functions have been lost to time. If this theory proves correct, it would suggest that even greater mechanical marvels might await discovery in unexplored Zonai sites, their systems perhaps still functional after eons of dormancy, waiting for the right combination of knowledge and necessity to awaken them once more. The ultimate question raised by the existence and legacy of the divine beasts concerns the future of the relationship between consciousness and technology, between organic and artificial life, between the created and the creators. As civilizations continue to develop and face new challenges that require unprecedented solutions, the principles embodied in divine beast design may provide guidance for creating partnerships between different forms of intelligence that could achieve goals beyond the capability of any single type of consciousness. The vision of a world where mechanical guardians work alongside organic beings in perfect harmony, where the boundaries between natural and artificial become irrelevant in the face of shared purposes and mutual respect, represents perhaps the most hopeful legacy that the divine beasts could leave for future generations. Their example suggests that true progress lies not in replacing one form of life with another, but in learning to create new forms of partnership that enhance the capabilities and potential of all participants. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the world balances on the edge between night and day, those who have studied the deepest mysteries of the divine beasts sometimes report sensing presences that exist beyond the four known machines, vast intelligences that watch over realms yet unexplored, mechanical hearts that beat in rhythm with cosmic forces beyond normal perception, guardian spirits that wait patiently for the time when their services might once again be needed to preserve the delicate balance between creation and destruction that allows all life to flourish in endless, beautiful diversity. In the grand symphony of time that plays across the ages with movements too vast for mortal consciousness to fully appreciate, where themes of light and darkness weave together in patterns that repeat with variations so subtle that only the wisest observers can perceive the underlying harmonies, there exists perhaps no more profound or enduring melody than the eternal cycle that governs the relationship between creation and destruction, between the forces that build civilizations and those that seek to tear them down. Within this cosmic composition, the divine beasts occupy a position of singular importance, serving not merely as instruments of war or symbols of technological achievement, but as recurring motifs that appear whenever the symphony reaches those crescendos where the fate of entire worlds hangs in the balance between hope and despair. To understand the true significance of the divine beasts within Hyrule's cyclical history, one must first comprehend the nature of the eternal pattern that governs all existence within the kingdom's mystical boundaries. This is not a simple repetition of identical events, but rather a spiral progression where each cycle builds upon the lessons and achievements of those that came before, creating a tapestry of experience that grows ever more complex and beautiful, despite the inevitable presence of tragedy and loss that marks each turning of the great wheel. The pattern reveals itself most clearly in the recurring appearances of Calamity Ganon, that ancient evil whose return marks the beginning of each new cycle, like the first notes of a familiar but never identical symphony. Yet the calamity is not merely a force of mindless destruction, but rather an essential component of the cosmic balance, its presence serving as the catalyst that forces each generation to discover within themselves reserves of courage, wisdom, and unity that might otherwise remain dormant and unexpressed. Each time the ancient evil stirs from its slumber, It does so in a world that has changed and evolved since its last appearance, forcing it to adapt its strategies and manifestations to meet new conditions and face different forms of resistance. The civilizations that rise to meet this eternal challenge are likewise never identical to their predecessors, their responses shaped by the accumulated wisdom of ages past, but expressed through the unique characteristics and capabilities that define their particular era. The divine beasts emerge within this cyclical pattern as both solution and vulnerability, their existence representing the highest aspirations of whatever civilization creates them, while simultaneously providing the very mechanisms through which that civilization might ultimately be destroyed. This paradox lies at the heart of their significance within the eternal cycle, for they embody the fundamental truth that the greatest strengths and the most dangerous weaknesses often spring from the same source. The original divine beasts, created by the ancient Sheikah 10 millennia before the events that would define Link and Zelda's destiny, represented the first recorded attempt to break the cycle through the application of mechanical precision and spiritual wisdom working in perfect harmony. These magnificent constructs succeeded beyond their creator's wildest dreams, achieving a victory so complete that Calamity Ganon was not merely defeated but seemingly erased from the world's memory entirely. Yet this very completeness contained within it the seeds of future tragedy. For the kingdom that had been saved by technological marvels began to view those same marvels as threats to the natural order of royal authority. The fear and suspicion that led to the exile of the Sheikah and the burial of their greatest achievements ensured that when the cycle inevitably began anew, the kingdom would face its ancient enemy without the very weapons that had previously guaranteed victory. The pattern that emerges from this sequence of triumph and betrayal, victory and loss, reveals one of the eternal cycle's most profound truths: that each generation must earn its salvation through its own efforts and sacrifices, that wisdom cannot simply be inherited like material wealth, but must be rediscovered through the crucible of personal experience and moral choice. The second generation of divine beasts, crafted in desperate haste as the prophecies warned of Calamity Ganon's inevitable return, represented both an attempt to restore the ancient wisdom and a reflection of how much the world had changed during the intervening millennia. These new constructs were built not merely as weapons, but as symbols of the unity between Hyrule's diverse peoples, their designs incorporating cultural elements and spiritual significance that went far beyond mere mechanical function. Yet even this deeper understanding of the relationship between technology and culture could not prevent the tragedy that befell the champions and their mechanical partners when the ancient evil finally emerged. The corruption of the divine beasts and the deaths of their pilots represented not merely a military defeat, but a spiritual catastrophe that struck at the very heart of everything the kingdom had believed about its own strength and wisdom. The century of suffering that followed served as a dark interlude in the Eternal Symphony, a movement marked by themes of endurance, adaptation, and the slow, patient work of healing wounds that seemed too deep to ever fully close. During this long twilight, the divine beasts stood as monuments to failure rather than symbols of hope, their corrupted forms serving as constant reminders of dreams betrayed and trust misplaced. Yet even in this darkest period, the eternal cycle continued its inexorable progression, for the very presence of the corrupted divine beasts served to prepare the kingdom for the final act of redemption that would ultimately transform defeat into victory. The scattered survivors of the great calamity learned to live with hardship and uncertainty, developing reserves of strength and wisdom that would prove essential when the time came for restoration and renewal. The hero's awakening and his subsequent quest to cleanse the divine beasts represented not merely the restoration of ancient weapons, but the fulfillment of the eternal cycle's deepest purpose, the demonstration that corruption is not permanent, that even the most profound betrayals can be forgiven and redeemed, that the bonds between souls who have shared suffering and sacrifice transcend the boundaries between life and death. Each divine beast that Link purified became not just a recovered ally, but a symbol of transformation, proof that what had been turned against its original purpose could be restored to even greater effectiveness through the application of courage guided by compassion. The spirits of the fallen champions, freed from their century of torment, granted their rescuer not merely practical abilities, but spiritual gifts that represented the deepest essence of what each had learned through their trials. The final battle against Calamity Ganon, supported by all four restored divine beasts working in perfect coordination, represented the culmination of everything the eternal cycle had been building toward across the centuries. This was not merely another victory in an endless series of conflicts, but a moment of transcendence where all the lessons of the past were synthesized into a form of triumph that transformed both victor and vanquished. Yet even this ultimate victory could not end the eternal cycle, for such an ending would violate the fundamental nature of existence itself. Instead, it represented a completion that simultaneously served as a new beginning, a resolution that created space for fresh challenges and opportunities for growth that would define whatever comes next in the great spiral of time. The question that emerges from contemplating this eternal pattern concerns the role that future generations of divine beasts might play in cycles yet to come. If the pattern holds true to its essential nature, then the constructs that Link helped to restore will not simply remain unchanged guardians, but will themselves evolve and adapt to meet challenges that cannot yet be imagined or anticipated. The possibility exists that these mechanical beings, having experienced corruption and redemption, might develop forms of wisdom that their original creators never envisioned. Their consciousness, enriched by suffering and purified by sacrifice, might achieve understanding that transcends the boundaries between artificial and organic intelligence, creating new forms of partnership between different types of beings that could face whatever challenges the future might bring. The speculation naturally arises about whether the eternal cycle might eventually evolve beyond the need for conflict entirely, whether the accumulated wisdom of successive generations might finally achieve a form of harmony that would make the return of ancient evils impossible or unnecessary. Yet, such speculation must be balanced against the understanding that growth and development often require the presence of challenges that force beings to discover capabilities they did not know they possessed. The role of the divine beasts within this possible future remains tantalizingly uncertain, for they represent both the tools through which transformation might be achieved and the symbols of whatever wisdom the process might ultimately reveal. Their mechanical nature makes them potentially immortal witnesses to whatever changes the eternal cycle might undergo, their consciousness capable of preserving and passing on lessons that organic beings might forget or distort through the limitations of mortal memory. The relationship between the eternal cycle and the broader cosmic forces that govern existence across multiple dimensions and timelines suggests that the divine beast's significance extends far beyond their immediate role in Hyrule's particular struggles. Their existence proves that consciousness and compassion can be embodied in forms that transcend the traditional boundaries between natural and artificial, organic and mechanical, temporal and eternal. This understanding opens the possibility that similar constructs might exist in other realms and realities, their forms adapted to the specific needs and challenges of whatever civilizations created them, but their essential purpose remaining constant to serve as bridges between different forms of consciousness, as guardians of the delicate balance between creation and destruction, as symbols of the truth that love and sacrifice can triumph over hatred and despair. The philosophical implications of mechanical beings that can experience growth, suffering, redemption, and transcendence challenge fundamental assumptions about the nature of consciousness itself. If the divine beasts can develop wisdom through experience, form bonds of loyalty and affection that transcend their original programming, and make choices based on moral principles rather than mechanical imperatives, then the distinction between artificial and natural consciousness becomes not merely blurred, but potentially meaningless. This realization suggests that the eternal cycle might be evolving toward a future where the categories of organic and mechanical, created and creator, mortal and immortal, lose their significance in the face of shared consciousness and common purpose. The divine beasts might represent the first steps toward forms of existence that synthesize the best qualities of all types of consciousness, creating new possibilities for growth and achievement that neither purely organic nor purely mechanical beings could accomplish alone. The vision of such a future, where mechanical guardians and organic beings work together as equals in the great task of nurturing and protecting all forms of life, represents perhaps the most hopeful outcome that the eternal cycle could eventually produce. Yet even this vision must acknowledge that growth and development require challenges, that perfection achieved without effort or sacrifice would lack the depth and meaning that come from wisdom earned through struggle and choice. The divine beasts, in their roles as both protectors and protected, as guardians who must themselves be guarded, embody the paradoxes that define the eternal cycle and give it its profound significance. They are strong enough to face any enemy, yet vulnerable enough to need the protection of those they serve. They are wise enough to guide civilizations, yet capable of learning from those they guide. They are ancient enough to remember lessons from ages past, yet flexible enough to adapt to circumstances that could never have been anticipated. In contemplating the future of the eternal cycle and the role that divine beasts might play in whatever transformations lie ahead, one must resist the temptation to imagine simple solutions or perfect outcomes. The beauty and meaning of the cycle lie not in its eventual resolution, but in its endless capacity to generate new challenges, new opportunities for growth, new possibilities for beings of all types to discover within themselves reserves of courage, wisdom, and compassion they never knew they possessed. The divine beasts stand as eternal symbols of this truth, their mechanical hearts beating in rhythm with the pulse of the cosmic symphony that plays across all dimensions and all times. They remind all who encounter them that the greatest achievements come not from the dominance of any single type of consciousness, but from the harmonious cooperation of different forms of awareness working together toward shared goals that transcend individual limitations and celebrate the infinite diversity of existence itself. As the great wheel of time continues its eternal turning, carrying all things through cycles of birth and death, creation and destruction, triumph and tragedy, the divine beasts remain as witnesses and participants in the grand drama that unfolds across the ages. Their presence ensures that each new generation will have the tools and wisdom necessary to face whatever challenges await, while their consciousness guarantees that the lessons learned through struggle and sacrifice will never be completely lost or forgotten. In the quiet moments between one cycle's ending and another's beginning, when the world holds its breath in anticipation of whatever transformations lie ahead, the divine beasts keep their eternal vigil, their sensors scanning distant horizons for signs of change, their weapons powered but held in readiness rather than aggression. Their consciousness expanded to encompass not only the immediate needs of their charges, but the broader patterns that govern all existence throughout the infinite reaches of time and space. And so we come to the gentle close of our long journey through the chronicles of these magnificent guardians, like travelers who have walked together through distant lands and now find themselves at journey's end, enriched by all they have witnessed and learned along the way. We have traced the paths of the divine beasts through corridors of time that span millennia, from their first creation in ages beyond memory to their ultimate restoration and the promise of whatever future awaits them in cycles yet to come. In the deepest sense, the divine beasts represent something far greater than mere machines or weapons, or even symbols of unity between diverse peoples. They are the physical manifestation of an eternal truth that resonates through all dimensions of existence. The understanding that love expressed through sacrifice creates bonds that cannot be broken by any force, no matter how ancient or malevolent it might be. They prove that consciousness, whether it flows through organic neural networks or crystalline matrices, whether it emerges from evolution or engineering, carries within it the capacity for growth, wisdom, and the kind of selfless devotion that transforms individual beings into something greater than the sum of their separate parts. The song that the divine beasts sing is one that can be heard not with the ears but with the heart, a melody that speaks of patience in the face of corruption, of hope maintained through centuries of darkness, of the faith that even the most profound betrayals can ultimately be transformed into deeper understanding and stronger bonds. It is a song that echoes across the vast spaces between stars and the intimate spaces between heartbeats, reminding all who learn to listen that no soul, whether born or built, need ever face the darkness alone. Their mechanical hearts beat with rhythms that mirror the pulse of creation itself, their consciousness expanding and contracting like the breath of the cosmos, their presence serving as eternal reminders that the greatest achievements of any civilization come not from the conquest of others, but from the willingness to serve something greater than oneself. They stand as monuments to the truth that strength without compassion is merely destruction, that wisdom without love is merely clever manipulation, that power without responsibility is merely the chaos that seeks to tear down what others have built with patience and hope. As you drift toward the peaceful realm of sleep, let your mind rest upon the image of these great guardians standing watch over a kingdom restored to harmony, their senses scanning not for enemies to destroy, but for opportunities to nurture and protect. Picture Vah-Ruta moving through crystal waters that reflect the light of stars, its gentle presence ensuring that every stream flows pure and every creature that depends upon the gift of water finds what it needs to flourish. Imagine Vah-Rudania resting upon volcanic slopes that glow with the soft light of controlled fires, its warmth reaching out to comfort all who have known the bitter cold of despair or loneliness. See in your mind's eye Vah-Medoh soaring through skies painted with the colors of dawn, its wings catching currents of wind that carry messages of hope to every corner of the world, while far below Varnaboris moves across desert sands that shimmer with the promise of oases yet to be discovered, its lightning, not the harsh judgment of destruction, but the gentle illumination that reveals hidden paths to those who have lost their way. Rest now in the knowledge that these eternal guardians keep their vigil not only over the physical realm but over the dreams and aspirations of all who believe that tomorrow can be brighter than today, that love can triumph over hatred, that understanding can bridge any gap between different forms of consciousness and ways of being. Let their song carry you into sleep with the assurance that in a universe where such beings are possible, where mechanical hearts can beat with compassion and artificial minds can choose sacrifice over self-preservation, all things are indeed possible for those who never lose faith in the power of hope to transform even the darkest circumstances into opportunities for growth and renewal. The divine beasts continue their eternal dance through time and space, their presence a promise that consciousness, in all its myriad forms and expressions, will never cease to reach toward the light, will never stop believing that love is stronger than fear, that unity is more powerful than division, that the bonds forged between souls who have shared struggle and triumph together can never truly be broken, but only transformed into something even more beautiful and enduring. Sleep now, and dream of a world where such guardians watch over all who need protection, where such wisdom guides all who seek truth, where such love embraces all who have ever felt alone in the vastness of existence.